My sister luxury wedding planner called me on a Tuesday morning with a ridiculous demand. "We need an extra $80,000 for the venue by noon," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. When I told her I did not have that kind of money lying around for a party, she chuckled. "I know you are just a low-level event coordinator, darling, but your family is tapped out. Beg or borrow it, or the wedding is off." I simply smiled into the receiver. "Have the owner of the estate contact me directly," I replied, and ended the call. 20 minutes later, my phone lit up with a furious message from my sister. "My name is Gwen. I am 33 years old, and for the past 15 years, I have been the black sheep of my family. I am a hospitality and real estate executive, though my family firmly believes I am a struggling assistant planning cheap corporate retreats." Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been underestimated by the people who should have supported you the most. The morning started peacefully in my Manhattan penthouse overlooking Central Park. I had poured myself a cup of black coffee and opened my laptop to review the latest acquisition reports for Horizon Holdings. That is the real estate empire I built from nothing after my parents kicked me out of their house. I was in the middle of reading a financial breakdown when my personal cell phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number. I answered it with my usual professional greeting. "Is this Gwen?" a sharp nasal voice demanded on the other end of the line. I did not even get a chance to confirm before she launched into her tirade. "This is Giselle. I am the premier wedding planner for your sister Ashley. We have a massive crisis and you need to fix it immediately." I set my coffee mug down slowly. I had not spoken to my sister in 3 months. Our relationship consisted of her calling me only when she needed someone to belittle. "What kind of crisis?" I asked, keeping my tone entirely neutral. "The venue crisis." Giselle sighed loudly, as if speaking to me was a tremendous burden on her day. "Ashley is getting married at the Monarch Estate in the Hamptons. It is the most exclusive property on the East Coast. Only top-tier elites can even secure a booking there. Your parents, Richard and Barbara, promised to cover the entire cost to impress the groom's family. But suddenly, their credit lines are bouncing. We need an extra $80,000 to secure the presidential suite and the private beach access. Your mother told me to call you to collect the balance." I stared at my reflection in the window. My parents were supposedly wealthy importers, but I knew their business had been struggling for a while. Now they were trying to force me to foot the bill for a party I was barely invited to. "I am sorry, Giselle," I said calmly. "Why exactly is this my responsibility?" Giselle let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "Because you are the older sister, Gwen. Your parents are restructuring their assets right now. Ashley is marrying Trey. He is an investment banker from one of the wealthiest old-money African-American families in Atlanta. This wedding has to be flawless. Your mother said you work in event management. I know you only handle cheap corporate luncheons and you live in some tiny apartment in the outer boroughs, but you need to step up. Take out a loan, max out your credit cards, cash out whatever pathetic savings you have. If you do not pay this $80,000 by noon, the owner of the Monarch Estate is going to cancel the contract." The sheer audacity of the demand was almost impressive. Giselle had no idea who she was talking to. She had no idea that I did not live in a tiny apartment. She certainly had no idea that Horizon Holdings owned several luxury properties across the country, including the very estate she was currently standing in. I leaned back in my leather chair. "I will not be paying you a single cent, Giselle." "Excuse me?" Giselle gasped, her voice pitching upward in outrage. "Do you want to ruin your sister's life? Do you have any idea who you are dealing with? The owner of this estate does not tolerate late payments." I smiled. "I know exactly how the owner operates," I replied. "If there is a billing issue with the contract, have the owner of the estate contact me directly." "Have a wonderful day, Giselle." I pressed the end call button and tossed my phone onto the desk. The Monarch Estate was my crown jewel. I had purchased it 2 years ago and transformed it into a premier destination for the ultra-wealthy. The fact that my parents were trying to rent my own property while actively hiding their financial ruin was a special kind of irony. Exactly 20 minutes later, my phone started vibrating violently across the mahogany desk. It was Ashley. I let it ring 3 times before picking up. "Are you out of your mind?" Ashley screamed into the receiver so loudly I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "How dare you disrespect Giselle like that? She is the most important planner in New York." "Hello to you too, Ashley," I said. "Do not play games with me, Gwen." She continued, her voice shrill and frantic. "Giselle just called me in tears. She said you refused to pay the venue fee and told her to call the owner. Are you trying to humiliate me in front of Trey and his family? Trey's parents are flying in on a private jet. They expect perfection." "I am not trying to humiliate anyone," I answered evenly. "I am simply refusing to pay $80,000 for a wedding I have no part in." "You owe me this," Ashley snapped. "You have always been jealous of me. Just because mom and dad kicked you out at 18 for refusing to go to law school does not mean you get to ruin my life. You are nothing but a glorified party planner. You should be honored that we are even allowing you to contribute to a high society event. Mom said you need to learn family loyalty." "Family loyalty is a two-way street," I reminded her. "A street this family has never walked down. You are a bitter, pathetic loser." Ashley spat the venom clear in every word. "Trey warned me about you. He said people from the bottom always try to drag successful people down. He comes from a prominent family in Atlanta, and he knows how jealous people like you operate. You better have that money transferred by tonight or you are dead to us. Mom is going to call you next and she is furious." I ended the call without another word. The delusion in her voice was staggering. My family was drowning in debt, attempting to scam a wealthy family into a marriage while treating me like dirt beneath their shoes. They wanted to play a game of wealth and status. As I looked out over the Manhattan skyline, I decided right then and there that I was going to let them play it all the way to the bitter end. Exactly 20 minutes later, my phone illuminated with a new incoming call. The caller ID flashed with my mother's name. I let it ring twice, taking a slow, deep breath to center myself before answering. I did not even have the chance to say hello before Barbara unleashed her fury. Her voice was a screeching siren that forced me to hold the device an inch away from my ear. "You ungrateful, spiteful little brat," my mother screamed. "I just had to spend 20 minutes consoling your sister because she was hyperventilating into a paper bag. Giselle is threatening to walk off the job and take her entire vendor team with her. How dare you speak to a professional of her caliber that way? How dare you jeopardize the most important day of your sister's life over your petty, pathetic jealousy?" I leaned back in my chair, watching the cursor blink on my computer screen. "I am not jealous, Mom. I simply refuse to be extorted for $80,000 to fund a party." "Extorted," she gasped, as if the very word wounded her soul. "We are your family. We are offering you the privilege of contributing to a monumental milestone. But I should have known you would do exactly this. I told your father we should have completely cut ties with you the day you packed your bags at 18. You have been a massive disappointment since the moment you dropped out of law school." Her words were designed to cut deep, to drag me back to a time when I was young and vulnerable. She wanted to remind me of the night she and my father threw me out onto the street. I remembered the cold rain soaking through my thin jacket as my father tossed my single suitcase down the front steps. I remembered my mother standing on the porch, her arms crossed, telling the neighbors that I was just going through a rebellious phase and needed tough love. They had my entire life mapped out. A prestigious law degree, a corner office at a top-tier firm, a respectable life they could brag about at their country club. When I told them I wanted to pursue real estate and property development, they looked at me like I had committed a crime. "You threw all our sacrifices back in our faces to peddle cheap houses like some street corner hustler," my mother yelled through the phone, echoing the exact insults she had used 15 years ago. "You humiliated this family, Gwen. You dragged our good name through the mud to chase a pipe dream. And look where it got you. A nobody coordinating cheap events while your sister is about to marry into a dynasty." I remained absolutely silent, letting her exhaust her own breath. I remembered sleeping in my beat-up car, eating instant noodles and studying market trends by the streetlights. I remembered flipping my first dilapidated property, then my 10th, until I had enough capital to buy out the very firms my parents worshipped. They still thought I was a lowly event coordinator who dabbled in real estate on the side. They never bothered to actually check on my life. They never realized that the street corner hustler had become the sole owner of Horizon Holdings, a multi-billion-dollar empire. We are on the verge of the most important merger of our lives. My mother continued, her tone shifting from rage to a frantic desperation. Trey's family is flawless. They are absolute royalty in Atlanta. Old money, impeccable reputation, unparalleled connections. Your father and I are positioning this family for a massive financial elevation, and you are acting like a petulant child over a measly $80,000. Do you have any idea how hard we are working to keep up appearances? If Trey comes from such immense wealth, why is he not covering the venue shortage? I asked, keeping my voice perfectly calm, knowing exactly how to strike a nerve. That is not how high society works, my mother snapped defensively. We are the bride's family. We host. We provide the venue. It is a matter of pride and tradition. But of course you would not understand that. You live in a different world, a small, pathetic world, where $80,000 actually means something. Your father is closing a massive international shipping deal next month. All our capital is tied up in overseas logistics. We are simply facing a temporary liquidity issue. Temporary liquidity issue. That was a fancy term for being flat broke. David, my head lawyer, had already briefed me on Richard's failing import business. They were drowning in debt, scrambling to keep up the facade of wealth. Listen to me very carefully. My mother's voice dropped to a lethal hissing whisper. Your father has booked a private table at a very exclusive restaurant tonight. 8 o'clock sharp. You are going to put on a decent dress if you even own one, and you are going to show up with a cashier's check for $80,000. You will hand it to me quietly. You will apologize to your sister for the stress you have caused her today, and you will be extremely polite to Trey. And if I refuse, I challenge softly. If you can manage to follow these simple instructions without embarrassing us, I will personally speak to Ashley. My mother offered, her voice dripping with fake magnanimity. I will convince her to let you attend the ceremony. We will find a seat for you in the back, away from the cameras and Trey's relatives. You can finally be part of this family again. This is your chance to make amends, Gwen. This is your chance to buy back your place in this family and wipe away the shame you caused us 15 years ago. I looked at the Horizon Holdings logo glowing on my computer screen. I looked at the digital deed to the Monarch estate sitting safely in my encrypted vault. They wanted to charge me $80,000 for a seat in the back row of my own property. They wanted me to fund their elaborate scam to trap a wealthy family into marriage. I will be at the dinner tonight, I said softly, a genuine smile finally touching my lips. I look forward to discussing the exact cost of my redemption. Do not be late, my mother commanded. And for heaven's sake, try to look like you belong in a fine dining establishment. We do not want Trey thinking we associate with the lower class. She ended the call with a sharp click. I set my phone down and stood up, walking over to the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse. The city buzzed below me, completely unaware of the storm I was about to unleash. My parents wanted to play a game of wealth and status. They wanted to parade their golden child and her elite fiancé in front of me while demanding my money. They had no idea that they had just invited the predator into the very trap they had set. I turned away from the floor-to-ceiling windows and walked back to my massive mahogany desk. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the imported Turkish rug, but my focus was entirely on the glowing monitors in front of me. I logged into the secure internal network of Horizon Holdings. The biometric scanner chimed a soft tone, verifying my identity as the sole founder and chief executive officer of the corporation. The dashboard loaded, displaying real-time data from dozens of luxury commercial properties, boutique hotels, and elite event spaces across North America. I typed a specific property code into the search bar, the Monarch Estate. Instantly, the screen populated with highly confidential documents. I clicked on the master deed. There it was in stark black and white. 100% ownership vested entirely in my name under a subsidiary holding company. I had purchased the sprawling Hamptons property 2 years ago when it was facing foreclosure from its previous owner. I poured millions into renovating the grand ballroom, the private beach access, and the infamous presidential suite. It was now the most coveted wedding destination for billionaires, celebrities, and foreign dignitaries. And now my parents, who had literally thrown me into the freezing rain 15 years ago, were trying to rent my property to impress a wealthy family from Atlanta. The irony was almost too heavy to carry. They were desperately trying to scrape together $80,000 to pay me. I picked up my secure office phone and pressed the direct line to my chief legal counsel. David answered on the first ring. His voice was sharp and professional, exactly what I needed right now. Good afternoon, Gwen. I assume this call is about the alert I received regarding a certain venue contract in the Hamptons. You saw the frantic emails from Giselle's agency, I asked, leaning back in my chair. I did, David replied, a hint of amusement in his tone. The planner has been leaving increasingly hysterical messages with our property management team. She claims the clients are facing a minor banking delay, but guarantees the funds are secure. I pulled the background file on your father's import company just to be thorough. It is a disaster, Gwen. Richard is severely overleveraged. His supply chain debt has multiplied, and his main creditors are preparing to file for insolvency. They are practically bleeding cash. They are using this wedding as a lifeline, I said, piecing together the timeline. Trey's family has serious old money. My parents are throwing a $500,000 party they cannot afford just to secure an alliance. They want to trap Trey's family into bailing out Richard's sinking ship. Precisely, David agreed. It is a classic high society bluff. Do you want me to terminate the venue contract immediately for breach of payment terms? We have every legal right to cancel the booking and retain their initial deposit. I smiled at the monitor. No, do not cancel a single thing. Leave the contract active. I want them to believe they can still pull this off. But I want you to put a strict monitor on the payment portal for the Monarch Estate. Let me know the exact second they attempt to run a credit card or wire a payment. I have a feeling they are going to do something incredibly stupid to get their hands on that $80,000. Understood, Gwen. David paused for a moment. Are you actually going to this dinner tonight? It sounds like a firing squad. I am going to walk right into the crosshairs, I replied. I will call you tomorrow morning with an update. I ended the call and glanced at the antique grandfather clock in the corner of my office. It was time to get ready. I left my study and walked down the hallway to my master suite. My walk-in closet was the size of most studio apartments in the city. It was meticulously organized, displaying rows of custom-tailored designer suits, silk evening gowns, and limited-edition Italian leather shoes. This was the wardrobe of a woman who commanded boardrooms and negotiated nine-figure acquisitions. But that was not the woman my family requested tonight. They wanted the failure. They wanted the impoverished event coordinator they could look down upon. I bypassed the luxury blazers and the expensive heels. I walked to the very back of the closet to a small section I kept specifically for occasions like this. I pulled out a simple off-the-rack navy blue pantsuit that I had purchased years ago. It was clean but noticeably cheap. The fabric lacked any real structure. I paired it with a basic white cotton blouse and a pair of scuffed black flats. I removed my diamond stud earrings and took off my expensive smartwatch, replacing it with a plain leather band watch. I pulled my hair back into a severe low ponytail and applied only the bare minimum of makeup. Looking in the full-length mirror, I barely recognized the billionaire real estate mogul. Staring back at me was exactly what Barbara and Richard expected to see. A tired, struggling woman who could not afford to keep up with their fabricated elite lifestyle. I grabbed a worn-out faux leather tote bag and headed for the private elevator. Usually my personal driver would be waiting downstairs in the armored black sedan. Instead, I sent him a message giving him the night off. I stepped out of my luxury building through the discreet side exit, avoiding the doormen, and walked 2 blocks to hail a standard yellow cab. The ride through the congested streets of Manhattan gave me plenty of time to mentally prepare. The restaurant my father had chosen was notoriously expensive, and securing a reservation required either massive wealth or significant social pull. It was the perfect stage for them to flaunt their imaginary superiority in front of Trey. The cab pulled up to the curb. I handed the driver cash and stepped out onto the pristine sidewalk. Valets in crisp uniforms were rushing to open doors for couples stepping out of luxury sports cars. I smoothed down my cheap navy blazer and took a deep breath of the cool evening air. I was about to sit at a table with people who despised my very existence simply because I had refused to follow their script. They were going to demand my money. They were going to demand my submission. I pushed open the heavy brass doors of the restaurant and walked into the softly lit foyer. The host looked me up and down, his eyes briefly lingering on my scuffed flats before plastering on a polite professional smile. I gave him my father's name. He nodded and gestured for me to follow him into the main dining room. The game was officially on. The host led me through a labyrinth of crystal chandeliers and velvet booths. The restaurant hummed with the hushed conversations of Wall Street executives and socialites. At the far end of the room, nestled in a semi-private alcove, I spotted my family. My mother, Barbara, wore an emerald silk dress that undoubtedly cost more than the average monthly rent in the city. My father, Richard, sat rigidly beside her in a bespoke tuxedo, trying to project an aura of untouchable wealth. Ashley sat across from them, draped in designer labels, looking every bit the spoiled heiress they had raised her to be. When I approached the table, the conversation instantly died. My mother's eyes swept over my cheap navy pantsuit and scuffed flats. Her lips thinned into a hard line of absolute disgust. She did not stand to greet me. None of them did. "You actually wore that," my mother hissed, her voice low to avoid attracting the attention of the nearby tables. "I specifically told you to dress appropriately, Gwen. We are meeting Trey here tonight." "It is clean and professional," I replied, pulling out the only empty chair available. They had deliberately assigned me the worst seat at the table. I was placed at the very end, practically jutting out into the main walkway right next to the swinging doors of the kitchen. It was the physical manifestation of my place in this family. An afterthought. An embarrassment to be kept on the fringes. Before my father could launch into a lecture about my appearance, the maitre d' stepped aside to reveal Trey. My future brother-in-law walked into the alcove with the effortless glide of a man who owned the world. Trey hailed from a prominent African-American family in Atlanta with generational wealth rooted in banking and real estate. He wore a flawless charcoal suit that hugged his athletic frame, perfectly paired with a vintage luxury watch that signaled exactly how much money he managed. He commanded attention, and he knew it. Trey kissed Ashley on the cheek and firmly shook my father's hand. Richard practically beamed with desperate approval, treating Trey less like a future son-in-law and more like a savior. Trey took the seat at the head of the table right next to Ashley, exuding absolute superiority. Then his dark, assessing eyes landed on me. He looked at my unstyled hair and my wrinkled blazer with a mixture of pity and amusement. "You must be Gwen," Trey said, leaning back in his chair and swirling the expensive bourbon the waiter had just handed him. "Ashley warned me you had a rather unique sense of style. I suppose the event planning business is not particularly lucrative these days." I smiled tightly. "The hospitality industry has its ups and downs, Trey. I manage just fine." "Manage is a word people use when they are failing, but refuse to admit it," Trey countered smoothly. His voice carried that distinct Southern elite charm, masking the absolute venom in his words. "Ashley tells me you are struggling to pull your weight for the wedding. She was practically in tears this afternoon because you threw a tantrum over a basic venue fee." I looked directly at Ashley, who suddenly found her water glass incredibly interesting. She had clearly spun a massive lie to her fiancé, painting me as the bitter, impoverished sister trying to ruin her big day. "I simply prefer to keep my finances separate from family matters," I told Trey, keeping my tone perfectly measured. Trey let out a short, condescending laugh. Finances implies you actually have capital to manage, Gwen. Let us be honest here. You live in a cramped apartment and organize budget retreats for mid-level managers. My family operates on a different echelon. We value legacy and wealth. When Ashley marries into my family, she becomes part of an empire. It reflects poorly on us to have a sister-in-law who cannot even afford a proper dress, let alone contribute to the wedding fund. He reached inside his tailored jacket and pulled out a sleek, matte black business card. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed it across the white tablecloth. The card slid and stopped right next to my water glass. I looked down at it. It bore the logo of one of the most ruthless investment banks in the financial district. His name was printed in bold gold lettering as a senior managing director. "Call my human resources department tomorrow morning," Trey ordered, his tone dripping with fake charity. "I will personally authorize them to bypass the usual background checks. We need someone to man the front desk on the 4th floor. You will be answering phones and fetching coffee for real executives. It pays a decent hourly wage. If you work enough overtime, you might just save up enough to buy Ashley a decent wedding gift. Or at the very least pay off whatever debts are making you so miserable." My mother let out a small, delighted gasp. "Oh, Trey, that is incredibly generous of you. Gwen, you should thank him immediately. This is the opportunity of a lifetime for someone in your position." My father nodded vigorously. "A stable job at a prestigious bank is exactly what you need, Gwen. It is time to stop playing around with those silly little events and get a real job. Trey is handing you a lifeline. Take it." I slowly picked up the business card. I ran my thumb over the embossed gold lettering. Trey was a senior managing director at a firm that Horizon Holdings had completely outbid on a massive commercial real estate acquisition just 3 weeks ago. His firm had lost millions on that deal because my team had crushed their proposal. And here he was sitting across from me, offering me a minimum wage job to answer his phones. The urge to laugh was almost suffocating. I wanted to drop my own titanium black card on the table and watch the color drain from his arrogant face. I wanted to tell him that my company could buy his entire department and liquidate it before dessert was served. But I needed them to dig their own graves. I needed them to commit completely to their delusion. I carefully tucked his business card into my cheap faux leather tote bag. "I appreciate the offer, Trey," I said, my voice quiet and steady. "I will certainly keep your front desk in mind if my current ventures do not pan out." Trey scoffed, taking a long sip of his bourbon. "Suit yourself. But do not expect any handouts from my family when you finally go bankrupt. We do not subsidize failure." The waiter arrived then, carrying silver trays of appetizers, creating a brief pause in the hostility. But I knew the main event was yet to come. My father had not called me here just to let Trey insult my career. They needed $80,000 to pay the venue owner. They needed my money to pay me. And I sat quietly in my corner seat, waiting for Richard to make his desperate move. The waiters cleared the silver appetizer plates with practiced efficiency, leaving behind a heavy, suffocating silence at our table. The ambient hum of the exclusive restaurant felt miles away. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, my eyes darting between the 4 people who considered me nothing more than a disposable asset. Richard straightened his bespoke tuxedo jacket. He reached for his crystal wine glass and a silver dessert spoon. He tapped the spoon against the crystal. The sharp, ringing sound cut through the low murmurs of the surrounding tables. Several wealthy patrons glanced in our direction, but Richard did not care. He thrived on an audience. "I would like to propose a toast," my father announced, his voice projecting a fake booming warmth. "To family, to legacy, and to the future." He raised his glass toward Trey, giving him a look of absolute submission disguised as mutual respect. "Trey, your family represents the pinnacle of success in Atlanta. Your parents have built an empire of influence. When you marry Ashley, you are not just gaining a wife, you are merging 2 powerful lineages." Trey smirked, swirling his bourbon. "We certainly have high standards, Richard." My parents expect a flawless execution this weekend. Anything less would be an insult to our name. And flawless it shall be. Barbara quickly chimed in, her voice dripping with desperation. We are sparing absolutely no expense. The Monarch estate is simply the beginning. Richard lowered his glass and turned his gaze to me. The fake warmth vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, calculating glare. The performance was over. It was time for the extortion. Gwen. My father began, his tone shifting into a sharp, commanding bark. As I mentioned on the phone, your mother and I are currently navigating a highly complex restructuring of our international shipping assets. We have millions tied up in European logistics. Because of this massive expansion, we are experiencing a brief, insignificant domestic cash flow delay. I kept my face entirely blank. The lie was so rehearsed, so polished, that I almost admired his dedication to the delusion. David had already sent me their bankruptcy filings. They did not have millions in Europe. They barely had enough in their checking account to cover the valet parking outside. The venue owner is demanding an immediate clearance of an $80,000 fee. Richard continued, leaning across the table and invading my personal space. On top of that, we have last-minute vendor upgrades to ensure Trey's family is properly accommodated. We need liquid cash immediately. He did not ask. He stated it as an irrefutable law of nature. And how does your liquidity issue involve me? I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. I had my accountant run a background check on your finances, Richard stated, completely ignoring the massive violation of privacy. You own a small apartment in Brooklyn. It is not much, but you have been paying the mortgage for years. You have enough equity built up to secure a fast, high-yield cash loan. I stared at him. He had actually investigated my fake apartment, the modest two-bedroom unit I maintained, strictly for appearances, to see how much blood he could squeeze from the stone. I have already spoken to a private lender, my father ordered, sliding a thick manila envelope across the white tablecloth until it hit my water glass. The paperwork is inside. You are going to sign a second mortgage on your apartment tomorrow morning. We need you to take out exactly $150,000. The funds will be wired directly into my business account by noon. The sheer audacity hung in the air. He wanted me to risk the only home he thought I possessed, to take on a massive, crippling debt just to fund a single weekend of fake luxury. Are you out of your mind? I asked softly, pushing the envelope back toward him. Barbara slammed her hand on the table, her emerald rings flashing under the chandelier light. Do not speak to your father that way. Trey's family highly values financial strength. They expect a spectacular display of wealth. You are the older sister, Gwen. You must sacrifice so your sister has a solid standing in high society. It is your absolute duty to ensure Ashley is not embarrassed in front of her new in-laws. My duty, I repeated, letting the words sink in. You threw me out onto the street when I was 18 with nothing but the clothes on my back. You disowned me. And now, 15 years later, my duty is to plunge myself into $150,000 of debt to pay for a party. It is not just a party. Ashley shrieked, her voice echoing loudly enough that the maitre d' took a hesitant step toward our alcove. It is my wedding. It is the most critical day of my life. You live a pathetic, miserable existence anyway. What does it matter if you have to pay off a loan for the next 20 years? You owe me this for being such a constant embarrassment to our name. Trey chuckled, shaking his head as if he were watching a pathetic reality television show. Listen to your father, Gwen. You are clearly out of your depth. Sign the papers, take the loan, and keep your sister happy. Like I said, you can work the reception desk at my firm to pay off the interest. Think of it as character building. I looked at the four of them. They were a circle of predators, entirely convinced that they had cornered their prey. They thought I was weak, terrified, and desperate for their approval. They thought the threat of being excluded from this glamorous facade would force me to sign away my life. I picked up the manila envelope. Richard smirked, assuming I had surrendered. Barbara let out a long, theatrical sigh of relief. I held the envelope up, maintaining eye contact with my father, and tore it cleanly in half. No, I said. The single word cracked like a whip across the table. I tore the envelope again, letting the shredded loan documents fall directly onto my empty dinner plate. I will not give you a single cent, I stated, my voice radiating absolute authority. I will not mortgage my home. I will not fund your delusions, and I will certainly not finance a wedding for a sister who despises me and a man who insults me. The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. Richard turned a violent shade of purple, his jaw clenching so hard I thought his teeth might shatter. Barbara gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. But Ashley's reaction was pure, unfiltered chaos. Her face contorted into a mask of rage. She let out a high-pitched, guttural sob, forcing tears to spill over her heavily contoured cheeks. She began to hyperventilate loudly, ensuring every patron in the restaurant turned to witness her manufactured trauma. "You are a monster!" Ashley screamed, pointing a manicured finger directly at my face. "You are trying to destroy my happiness because nobody will ever love you." She reached into her designer handbag, her hands shaking with dramatic flair. She pulled out a thick gold embossed envelope. It was the formal wedding invitation written in elegant calligraphy bearing my name. "You are dead to me," Ashley shrieked. She gripped the heavy cardstock and ripped it violently down the middle. She tore the invitation again and again, panting heavily before standing up and throwing the jagged, destroyed pieces directly at my chest. The shredded paper fluttered down, landing perfectly on top of the ruined loan documents on my plate. "You are uninvited," Ashley wailed, collapsing back into Trey's arms and burying her face in his expensive suit jacket. "I never want to see your ugly, poor face again." Trey glared at me, wrapping a protective arm around his weeping fiancée. "You are truly a miserable piece of work, Gwen. You just ruined your only chance to associate with real power." I looked down at the shredded invitation in my lap. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply brushed the torn paper off my cheap navy blazer, knowing exactly what kind of hell I was going to unleash on them tomorrow. Richard stood up so fast, his heavy oak chair scraped violently against the polished marble floor. The sharp grating noise echoed across the elegant dining room, causing several wealthy patrons to snap their heads in our direction. His face was a mask of pure, unfiltered rage, the veins in his neck bulging against his bespoke tuxedo collar. "You are an absolute disgrace to the blood in your veins," he snarled, his voice vibrating with a dangerous low frequency. "We offer you a hand to pull you out of your pathetic, miserable life, and you spit in our faces." Barbara gathered her emerald silk wrap, pulling it tightly around her shoulders, as if my very presence was a disease she might catch. "Do not ever call us again," my mother hissed, her eyes narrowing into cold slits. "You are completely cut off. When your miserable little event planning gig goes under, do not come crawling back to us begging for shelter. You are entirely on your own in this world." Trey helped Ashley to her feet, keeping one protective arm around her waist, while she continued to produce fake, tearless sobs. "Let us go," Trey commanded, glaring down at me with absolute contempt. "She is not worth another second of our time. People like her are destined to stay at the bottom. She lacks the vision and the class to ever understand what we are building." Before turning away, Richard reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket. For a split second, I thought he was actually going to pay for the extravagant meal they had just consumed to maintain his wealthy facade in front of Trey. Instead, he raised his hand and snapped his fingers aggressively at the nearest waiter. The young man hurried over, carrying a sleek black leather check holder. Richard snatched it from the waiter's hands and tossed it directly onto my chest, right over the shredded pieces of the wedding invitation. "Consider this your final lesson in family loyalty," my father sneered, leaning over the table. "Since you refuse to contribute a single cent to your sister's future, you can pay for her dinner. Trey ordered the vintage reserve bourbon, and your mother had the imported caviar. It is the least you can do. Maybe washing dishes in the back kitchen tonight will teach you some much-needed respect for your betters." They turned in unison and marched out of the alcove, a parade of toxic entitlement and fake superiority. I sat completely still, watching their retreating backs as they navigated through the maze of crystal chandeliers and velvet booths. They held their heads high, projecting an image of untouchable elite status. They did not look back once. They walked out of the heavy brass doors, stepping into the crisp Manhattan night, leaving me alone at a table littered with half-eaten lobster tails, empty bourbon glasses, and shredded documents. The young waiter stood awkwardly nearby, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He had witnessed the entire humiliating spectacle. He looked at my cheap navy blazer, my unstyled hair, and my scuffed flats. I could see the panic and deep pity in his eyes. He clearly thought I was a struggling working-class woman who had just been abandoned by her cruel relatives with a massive bill she could never afford. The surrounding tables had fallen silent, casting sympathetic but uncomfortable glances in my direction. I calmly picked up the leather folder from my lap and opened it. The total printed at the bottom of the receipt was exactly $1,542. It was a staggering, crippling amount for an ordinary event coordinator living paycheck to paycheck. It was a mere rounding error for the chief executive officer of Horizon Holdings. I reached into my worn-out faux leather tote bag. Past the cheap notebooks and the basic pens, I found my hidden wallet. I bypassed the standard debit cards I used to maintain my impoverished cover identity. Instead, I slid my fingers into the concealed back slot and pulled out a heavy, sleek piece of anodized titanium, the exclusive black card, a financial instrument offered by invitation only, strictly reserved for clients with a verified net worth in the hundreds of millions. It had no spending limit. It was the ultimate key to the city's hidden elite ecosystem. I placed the heavy metal card onto the leather folder and held it out to the waiter. He took it hesitantly, expecting a declined debit card. As his fingers brushed the cold, heavy titanium, his eyes widened in shock. He blinked, staring at the minimalist design of the card, then looked back up at my cheap suit. The cognitive dissonance was written all over his face. "I will need the general manager to process this, ma." He stuttered, suddenly realizing that the woman sitting before him was not a victim of circumstance, but a predator in disguise. "I will be right back. Please excuse me." Less than 2 minutes later, the general manager himself hurried over to my table, almost sprinting across the dining room floor. His previous aura of polite disdain, the one he had given me when I first walked in, was completely gone. His face was pale, and his posture was rigid with absolute deference. He recognized the card immediately. He knew exactly what kind of unfathomable wealth and silent power was required to possess it. He placed the leather folder back on the table with trembling hands. "Everything is taken care of perfectly," he said, bowing deeply from the waist, his voice trembling slightly. "It is an absolute honor to have you dine with us tonight. Please accept our sincerest and most profound apologies for any disruption you experienced during your meal. If there is anything else you require, my entire staff is completely at your disposal. We can have a private car brought around for you immediately." "That will not be necessary," I replied, keeping my tone professional and detached. I signed the receipt deliberately, adding a generous $500 tip for the terrified young waiter who had stood by. I gathered my faux leather bag and stood up from the table, brushing a final piece of Ashley's torn invitation off my shoulder. The general manager continued to bow, ushering me out of the alcove and walking slightly behind me to clear the path. He escorted me all the way to the front entrance with the kind of reverence usually reserved for royalty or heads of state. The host, who had looked down on my shoes earlier, now rushed to hold the heavy brass doors open for me, averting his eyes respectfully. I stepped out into the cool city air. My family was long gone, completely oblivious to the scene that had just unfolded behind them. They were probably sitting in a luxury rideshare right now, patting themselves on the back for putting me in my place. They thought they had left me broken and humiliated, crushed under the weight of a restaurant bill I would have to beg to pay off. They believed they had won the ultimate victory, asserting their dominance over the family failure. They had absolutely no idea that I had just bought their entire reality. I walked down the block, blending seamlessly back into the crowded Manhattan sidewalk, a ghost moving through the city. I pulled out my phone and sent a single text message to David, my head lawyer. Proceed to the next phase. Lock the trap. Tomorrow morning I was going to tear their fragile, pathetic world entirely apart. I woke up early the next morning feeling entirely refreshed, despite the absolute hostility of the previous night. The crisp morning sunlight poured through the massive windows of my Manhattan penthouse, illuminating the pristine hardwood floors. I had just finished my morning workout and poured a cup of dark roast espresso when the private elevator chimed directly into my foyer. David stepped out carrying a thick leather briefcase. As the chief legal counsel for Horizon Holdings, he usually sent my daily briefings via our encrypted secure server. His physical presence at 7 in the morning signaled an absolute emergency. He did not bother with pleasantries or offering a good morning. He walked straight to my marble kitchen island and pulled out a stack of documents marked highly confidential. "Gwen, we have a massive breach," he said, his voice tight with urgency as he spread the papers across the granite surface. "I intercepted a severe red flag on your personal credit monitoring matrix at 3 in the morning. Your parents did not just demand you take out a mortgage at the restaurant last night. They had a sinister backup plan ready to execute the moment you refused." I leaned against the counter, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. "Tell me exactly what they did, David." He slid a printed application form toward me, tapping a manicured finger on the bottom right corner. "Barbara and Richard used your social security number to apply for a $200,000 loan from a highly predatory black market lending group. They bypassed traditional banking security by forging your signature on every single document. They used your old childhood address and fabricated several years of tax returns to make it look like you were applying for emergency business funding to keep a struggling event company afloat." I stared at the forged signature on the bottom line. It was a remarkably accurate copy of my handwriting. They must have practiced it for weeks, anticipating my refusal at the dinner table. They were actively trying to steal $200,000 in my name. They knew the interest rates on these black market loans were exorbitant, designed to trap the borrower in a cycle of endless repayment. They fully intended to take the cash and leave me with crippling debt that would eventually destroy my financial standing and personal credit. They wanted to completely ruin me just to fund Ashley's extravagant wedding. The audacity is staggering. David continued pacing across the wide kitchen floor, his sophisticated suit catching the morning light. But I knew there had to be a deeper reason for them to risk committing a federal crime. I dug into Richard's corporate accounts to understand why they would suddenly turn to shadow lenders. I hacked into the public commercial records and cross-referenced them with their offshore shell companies. "Gwen, your father's import business has been completely bankrupt for 8 full months. They have absolutely zero liquid assets left to their name. Their corporate credit cards are maxed out to the limit, and they are currently facing multiple lawsuits from unpaid overseas suppliers." I looked up from the forged documents, slowly putting the pieces of the puzzle together. The designer clothes my mother wore, the country club memberships they bragged about, the boastful speeches at the restaurant last night. It was all a carefully constructed illusion, a massive, fragile house of cards, waiting for a strong breeze to knock it down. "So how are they paying for a $500,000 wedding?" I asked, my mind calculating the sheer scale of their deception. "They are not," David replied, stopping in front of me and crossing his arms. "They are using this entire wedding as a brilliant bait and switch operation. They are pouring every last stolen cent they can find into projecting an image of extreme wealth to impress Trey's family." Trey belongs to the elite banking sector in Atlanta. His parents control a massive venture capital firm that deals in 9-figure acquisitions. Richard and Barbara are using Ashley to secure a strategic financial alliance. They are planning to pitch a fake expansion project to Trey's father right after the wedding ceremony concludes. They want to extract a $5 million investment from his prestigious family to silently bail out their sinking ship. They are trying to scam the billionaires. The sheer scale of their delusion was almost admirable. They were playing a high-stakes game of poker with absolutely no chips in their hands. They genuinely thought they were the smartest people in the room, outsmarting both me and Trey's arrogant lineage. They were willing to sacrifice my freedom and my future just to maintain their elite facade. I will call the federal authorities immediately, David stated, pulling out his phone and opening his contacts. We have enough hard evidence of identity theft and wire fraud to have Richard and Barbara arrested before noon. They will be in handcuffs before they even pick up their morning coffee. I reached out and placed my hand over his phone, pushing it down gently against the marble counter. No, David, I said, keeping my voice dangerously quiet and perfectly composed. Do not call the police. Do not alert the authorities. Let them proceed with the illusion. David looked at me in complete disbelief, his eyes widening. Gwen, they committed a serious felony against you. If this loan processes, you will be legally liable for the initial transfer. You cannot let them get away with this level of financial abuse. I smiled, looking down at the forged signature that was supposed to seal my doom. They want to play the elite society game. Let us give them the exact rope they need to hang themselves. Contact the lending agency through our backdoor corporate channels. Use our financial leverage to intercept the approval process. I want you to freeze the loan application in a perpetual pending state. Do not explicitly deny it, but do not let the funds transfer under any circumstances. I want Richard and Barbara to log into their portal and see that the money is supposedly on its way. Let them feel the rush of victory. Let them believe they successfully stole my identity and secured the cash to pay the venue owner. They are going to walk into the Monarch estate completely blind to the fact that I own the building and I hold the invisible leash around their necks. The morning after my meeting with David, my phone buzzed with a text message from Ashley. It was a long paragraph dripping with artificial magnanimity. She informed me that my mother had successfully secured the $80,000 to pay the venue fee, saving the family from the immense embarrassment I had tried to cause. Ashley then stated that, out of the goodness of her heart, she was willing to offer me one final chance to redeem myself. If I wanted to earn a seat in the back row of her wedding, I was to report immediately to the Monarch estate in the Hamptons. My assigned duty was to act as the personal luggage carrier and errand runner for her wedding planner, Giselle. I read the message twice, letting the sheer comedy of the situation wash over me. They genuinely believed their fraudulent loan application had gone through, and they were now strutting into my territory armed with my stolen money. I replied with a simple confirmation, letting her know I would be there in 2 hours. I changed back into the cheap navy pantsuit and scuffed flats from the previous night. I wanted to give them the exact impoverished aesthetic they expected. I bypassed my private helicopter and instead drove a modest rental sedan out to the eastern end of Long Island. The drive took a little over 2 hours. As I approached the towering wrought iron gates of the Monarch estate, a deep sense of pride settled in my chest. I had bought this sprawling 50-acre property when it was a decaying relic. I personally oversaw the restoration of the limestone facade, the manicured European gardens, and the grand ballroom that overlooked the Atlantic Ocean. It was a masterpiece of luxury hospitality. I pulled up to the security checkpoint. The head of security, a towering former Marine named Harrison, stepped out of his booth. He saw my face through the windshield and immediately stood at attention, preparing to hit the override button to open the private owner's lane. I quickly rolled down my window and gave him a subtle but firm shake of my head. I held up my hand, signaling him to treat me like a standard vendor. Harrison was a professional. He instantly masked his confusion, seamlessly transitioning into his standard visitor protocol. He handed me a temporary vendor pass and directed me to park in the gravel service lot located a half-mile away from the main entrance. I walked the long, winding service path, carrying the cheap tote bag over my shoulder. The salty ocean breeze whipped through my unstyled hair. As I rounded the corner to the grand marble staircase of the main entrance, I spotted them. Ashley stood posing for a selfie in a designer sundress, while a woman I could only assume was Giselle barked orders at a team of terrified florists. Giselle wore a sharply tailored stark white blazer and towering stilettos that were completely impractical for navigating a sprawling estate. She held a gold-plated clipboard and surveyed the grounds with a look of permanent dissatisfaction. When Ashley spotted me approaching, her face lit up with a triumphant, cruel smile. "You actually showed up?" Ashley sneered, crossing her arms as I reached the bottom of the marble steps. "I am honestly surprised. Mom said you would be too ashamed to show your face after we handled the venue fee without your help. But I suppose you finally realize this is your only chance to associate with high society." I kept my expression entirely neutral. "You said you needed assistance with the luggage, Ashley. I am here to help." Ashley turned to the wedding planner. "Giselle, this is my older sister Gwen, the one I told you about. She's going to be your personal assistant for the day. Make sure she earns her keep." Giselle slowly turned her head and subjected me to a grueling top-to-bottom visual inspection. Her perfectly arched eyebrows drew together in deep offense. She looked at my scuffed black flats and my poorly fitted navy blazer as if I had just dragged mud across a sacred temple floor. "This is the sister Giselle," asked, her voice a high-pitched nasal whine. "Ashley, darling, you did not warn me she would look so incredibly pedestrian. We are at the Monarch Estate. We have a strict aesthetic code to maintain. I cannot have someone walking around my event space looking like a mid-level accounting clerk from a failing strip mall business." I simply smiled, keeping my hands folded in front of me. "I apologize if my attire offends you, Giselle. I am just here to carry the boxes." Giselle let out a dramatic sigh, waving her gold clipboard in my direction. "Fine. Take those 6 garment bags from the luxury transport van and carry them up to the bridal suite. And be incredibly careful. Those gowns cost more than you probably make in an entire decade. After that, you will unpack the crystal centerpieces. Do not drop anything. I will personally deduct the cost from whatever pitiful allowance your family gives you." I walked over to the van and loaded the heavy garment bags over my shoulder. They were incredibly heavy, but I carried them effortlessly. As I walked back past the 2 women, Giselle was busy inflating her own ego for Ashley's benefit. "You do not need to worry about the venue management," Ashley, Giselle boasted loudly, ensuring I could hear every word. "I have an incredibly tight personal relationship with the owner of this estate. The CEO of Horizon Holdings is notoriously reclusive, but we actually had drinks last month in Manhattan. He is a brilliant older gentleman. He practically begged me to bring more elite clients to his property. He gave me unprecedented authority over the grounds." I stopped walking for a fraction of a second. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from bursting into laughter. Giselle was standing on my driveway, staring directly at the 33-year-old female founder of Horizon Holdings and spinning an elaborate lie about having drinks with an older gentleman. She was trying to weaponize my own fictional identity to intimidate me. "That is amazing," Giselle Ashley fawned, looking at the planner with absolute admiration. "Trey will be so impressed. His family loves people with high-level connections. Maybe you can introduce us to the owner later." "Oh, he is extremely busy," Giselle replied smoothly, brushing a piece of lint off her white blazer. "But if you behave perfectly, I might pull some strings. I have him on speed dial. Now, Gwen, hurry up with those bags. We do not have all day to wait for you to stumble up the stairs." I adjusted the heavy garment bags on my shoulder and gave Giselle a polite, deferential nod. "Right away, Giselle. I am sure the owner is very lucky to have someone like you representing his interests." I turned and walked up the grand marble staircase, entering the massive gilded foyer of my own property. The crystal chandelier I had personally sourced from a private auction in Paris sparkled above me. The Italian marble floors I had selected echoed beneath my cheap shoes. They were treating me like a peasant in the very castle I had built from the ground up. They were standing on my land, breathing my air, and bragging about phantom connections to my name. I carried the garment bags toward the grand elevator, a silent smile playing on my lips. The trap was set perfectly, and they were sprinting happily right into the center of it. I navigated the grand staircase back down to the main foyer, after securely storing the bridal gowns. The sweeping double doors of the Monarch estate were wide open, allowing the coastal breeze to filter into the lobby. A sleek black Rolls-Royce pulled up to the circular driveway. The driver quickly stepped out to open the rear doors. Trey had bragged endlessly about his family, but seeing his parents in person confirmed every piece of intelligence David had gathered. Winston and Beatrice stepped out of the vehicle, projecting the kind of quiet, untouchable power that only came from decades of generational wealth in Atlanta. Beatrice wore a perfectly tailored ivory suit and a modest string of genuine pearls. Winston stood tall in a custom linen suit, exuding the calm authority of a man who served on multiple philanthropic boards. They did not need to raise their voices to command a room. They were the epitome of the Black elite, a family that prioritized dignity, honor, and impeccable public behavior above all else. Unfortunately, my sister possessed absolutely none of those qualities. As Winston and Beatrice crossed the threshold into the grand foyer, a shrill, shrieking voice echoed from the adjacent ballroom. It was Ashley. She was standing in the center of the room, pointing a manicured finger directly into the face of a young woman. That young woman was my senior floral director, an incredibly talented botanist I had personally recruited from London. I said, stark white. Ashley screamed, her face flushed a blotchy red. Are you completely deaf, or just incompetent? These hydrangeas have a cream undertone. They look like they were picked out of a cheap grocery store bin. I am marrying into a prominent family, and I will not have my reception look like a budget backyard barbecue. Get these out of my sight and replace them immediately before I have Giselle fire you. My senior floral director maintained her composure, keeping her hands clasped professionally in front of her. She handled billionaires on a daily basis and was trained to deal with high-stress clients, but Ashley's behavior was pushing the limits of basic human decency. Winston and Beatrice stopped dead in their tracks at the entrance of the ballroom. The look of profound distaste that washed over Beatrice's face was instantaneous. In her world, a public tantrum was the ultimate sign of low class. Wealth whispered, but trash screamed. Beatrice turned her head slightly to exchange a heavily weighted glance with her husband. Her lips pursed in clear disapproval. This was not the elegant, refined bride Barbara and Richard had promised them. This was a spoiled child throwing a tantrum over a shade of white. My mother Barbara had been hovering near the catering station. When she spotted Winston and Beatrice standing at the doorway witnessing Ashley's humiliating meltdown, panic completely seized her features. The $5 million investment plan was evaporating right before her eyes. She needed a scapegoat immediately to explain away Ashley's atrocious lack of manners. Barbara frantically scanned the room. Her desperate eyes locked onto me as I stood quietly near the doorway holding my cheap tote bag. In a fraction of a second, her vicious survival instinct kicked in. She practically sprinted across the marble floor, grabbing my upper arm with a bruising grip and yanking me forward into the direct line of sight of Trey's parents. Winston, Beatrice. My mother gasped, forcing a wide, breathless smile onto her face as she dragged me toward them. I am so incredibly thrilled you arrived safely. Please forgive the slight elevation in volume you just heard. We are dealing with a rather unfortunate family situation this morning. Beatrice raised a single, perfectly sculpted eyebrow. Her gaze shifted from Ashley, who was still fuming in the center of the room, to me, and then back to my mother. It sounded as though Ashley was quite distressed with the venue staff. Beatrice noted her tone polite, but chillingly cold. We hold the people who work for us to a high standard, but we never forget our manners, Barbara. Oh, it is not the staff at all. My mother lied seamlessly, tightening her grip on my arm until her nails dug into my sleeve. It is Gwen, my eldest daughter. She shoved me slightly forward, presenting me like a piece of defective merchandise. Beatrice and Winston looked at my scuffed flats and my poorly fitted navy blazer. I kept my face entirely devoid of emotion. Gwen has been struggling with some very severe personal and financial failures recently. Barbara continued, her voice dripping with manufactured maternal sorrow. She has always been incredibly jealous of Ashley's success. It breaks my heart to say this, but Gwen has been deliberately sabotaging the floral arrangements and moving the seating charts this morning just to stress her sister out. Ashley is normally the sweetest, most poised girl in the world. But Gwen has pushed her to the absolute breaking point today by ruining the decor. The sheer magnitude of the lie was breathtaking. Barbara was willing to paint her own daughter as a mentally unstable, jealous saboteur just to cover up Ashley's horrific personality. She was feeding me to the wolves to save her fraudulent financial alliance. Beatrice looked at me, her expression hardening. She clearly bought my mother's desperate fiction. In Beatrice's world, a bitter, impoverished older sister trying to ruin a grand wedding was a plausible narrative. It is a terrible shame when family members cannot find it in their hearts to be supportive. Winston added, his deep voice, carrying a note of stern judgment. Jealousy is a destructive force, young lady. You should be uplifting your sister on her momentous day, not causing her unnecessary distress. I looked directly into Winston's eyes. I did not defend myself. I did not scream or cry or call my mother a liar. If I caused a scene right now, I would only validate their assumptions and give my mother exactly what she wanted. I needed them to feel completely secure in their false superiority. I apologize if my presence has caused any disruption to the aesthetic of the morning. I said, my voice perfectly modulated and respectful. I am only here to carry the luggage and assist where needed. I will ensure the hydrangeas are dealt with immediately. Beatrice gave a stiff, approving nod, clearly satisfied that I knew my place at the bottom of the social hierarchy. Barbara let out a loud, dramatic sigh of relief, releasing my arm and turning her attention fully to her wealthy guests. Please do not let her behavior ruin your tour, my mother fawned, gesturing toward the grand terrace. Let us leave Gwen to clean up her mess. I want to show you the private beach access Trey specifically requested for the cocktail hour. The venue owner has been very accommodating to us. As Barbara led Winston and Beatrice away, showering them with compliments and fabricated stories of our family wealth, I stood alone in the grand foyer. My floral director caught my eye from across the ballroom. She looked absolutely furious on my behalf, ready to march over and defend me. I gave her a sharp, subtle shake of my head. She immediately understood the silent command and returned to her work, ignoring Ashley's continued huffing. My family had just used me as a human shield to protect their fragile scam. They had humiliated me in front of the very people they were trying to defraud. They believed I was trapped under their thumb, forced to swallow their abuse because I was poor and powerless. I picked up my cheap tote bag and walked toward the administrative wing of the estate, a quiet, lethal energy burning in my chest. The game was escalating, and I was about to raise the stakes. I watched my mother guide Winston and Beatrice toward the grand terrace, her nervous laughter echoing against the marble walls. The moment the heavy oak doors closed behind them, the fake maternal warmth completely vanished from her face. She practically sprinted back into the main foyer, her emerald silk dress swishing furiously around her ankles. She grabbed Ashley by the arm, her manicured fingernails digging into my sister's wrist. We need to elevate this immediately, Barbara hissed, her voice a frantic whisper. Did you see the way Beatrice looked at the floral arrangements? She looked at us like we were peasants serving her fast food on paper plates. We are losing control of the narrative. It is Gwen's fault, Ashley whined, stomping her designer heel against the pristine floor. She ruined my mood and made me scream. Now Trey's mother thinks I am some kind of hysterical lunatic. I need to fix this. I need to show them that we are completely on their level. Ashley whipped her head around and locked eyes with Giselle, who was busy berating a terrified lighting technician. Giselle Ashley barked, marching over to the wedding planner. The Ocean View suite is entirely unacceptable. It only has 3 balconies and it faces the East Gardens. I cannot have Beatrice and Winston walk into a standard bridal suite. I need the presidential suite. I need the top floor. Giselle lowered her gold-plated clipboard, her perfectly arched eyebrows shooting up toward her hairline. Ashley, darling, the presidential suite was not in your original contract. It is the crown jewel of the Monarch estate. It spans the entire top floor and includes a private helipad, a temperature-controlled infinity pool, and a personal butler. The venue management keeps it strictly locked down. They usually reserve it for foreign dignitaries or billionaire tech founders. I do not care who they usually reserve it for. Ashley shrieked, her voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers. I am marrying into a prominent Atlanta banking dynasty. Trey is a senior managing director. If I do not get that suite, Trey's mother is going to think we are completely broke. Fix it, Giselle. You said you had the owner on speed dial. Call him and get me those keys. Richard, who had been pacing near the grand staircase, marched over to join the chaotic huddle. His bespoke tuxedo jacket was unbuttoned, revealing his mounting anxiety. He knew exactly how close their massive financial scam was to collapsing. If Beatrice and Winston smelled even a hint of poverty, the $5 million investment deal would evaporate before the cocktail hour. Do not bother calling anyone, Richard ordered, waving his hand dismissively at Giselle. We do not need to beg for favors. We are paying customers. I will handle the staff myself. My father turned and snapped his fingers aggressively at the main concierge desk. He did not ask for assistance. He demanded absolute obedience. Get the general manager out here immediately, Richard commanded, his voice booming across the foyer. Tell him Richard requires his presence. I stood quietly near a towering marble pillar, gripping the straps of my cheap faux leather tote bag. I watched the heavy mahogany doors behind the concierge desk swing open. A tall, impeccably dressed man stepped out into the lobby. It was Mr. Caldwell, the general manager of the Monarch estate. I had personally hired him away from a five-star hotel in Dubai 3 years ago. He was brilliant, calculating, and fiercely loyal to Horizon Holdings. Mr. Caldwell adjusted his tailored suit jacket and walked toward my raging family with a serene, unbothered expression. He was fully aware of my true identity. We had reviewed the weekly financial reports together just yesterday morning. But as he approached the chaotic group, he did not even cast a glance in my direction. He played his part flawlessly. Good morning, Mr. Caldwell, said his voice a smooth, professional baritone. I understand there is a concern regarding your accommodations. How may the estate assist you today? Listen to me very carefully, Richard growled, stepping into Mr. Caldwell's personal space to assert his fake dominance. My daughter is hosting the most significant high society wedding this venue will see all year. The current bridal suite is entirely inadequate for our needs. We require immediate access to the presidential suite. We have highly influential guests arriving, and we will not tolerate second-tier treatment. Ashley crossed her arms, glaring at the manager. If you do not hand over those keys right now, I will personally ensure this entire estate is ruined on social media. My fiancé controls billions of dollars in assets. Do not make us destroy your reputation. Giselle chimed in, pointing her gold pen at Mr. Caldwell. I highly suggest you comply. I have a very close personal relationship with the owner of this property. If you refuse to accommodate my bride, I will have you fired by the end of the day. The sheer level of delusion was intoxicating. They were standing in my house, threatening my most trusted employee with my own fictional wrath. Mr. Caldwell did not flinch. He did not break his professional smile. He simply folded his hands behind his back and absorbed their ridiculous demands. He knew the protocol. He knew he held the ultimate authority. But he also knew who truly pulled the strings. For a fraction of a second, Mr. Caldwell shifted his gaze over Richard's shoulder. His sharp eyes cut through the bustling lobby and landed directly on me. I stood perfectly still in the shadows of the marble pillar. I looked right back at him. Slowly, deliberately, I gave him a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was the green light. The trapdoor was wide open, and it was time to let them step onto the fragile wood. Mr. Caldwell smoothly returned his attention to my red-faced father. He offered a slight deferential bow. "I completely understand your position, sir," Mr. Caldwell said, his tone dripping with polished corporate grace. "We always strive to provide our elite clients with the utmost luxury. The presidential suite is indeed vacant this weekend. We can certainly accommodate the upgrade immediately and arrange for the private butler to transfer your daughter's luggage." Ashley let out a loud, triumphant squeal, clapping her hands together. She shot a venomous, gloating look in my direction as if to say she had just conquered the world. Richard puffed out his chest, adjusting his tuxedo lapels with intense pride. Barbara practically vibrated with relief, knowing she could now flaunt the top-floor suite to Trey's wealthy parents. "See, Giselle," Ashley bragged loudly. "That is how real power works. You just have to demand what you deserve." Mr. Caldwell raised a single hand politely, pausing their celebration. "However, there is a strict operational policy regarding impromptu upgrades of this magnitude." Mr. Caldwell continued, his voice lowering into a serious, unyielding register. "Because the presidential suite was not secured in your original contract, we cannot simply invoice the amount. The estate's policy requires an immediate and direct card payment to release the keys." Richard waved his hand arrogantly. "Fine, fine. Add the upgrade fee to the final bill. We are good for it." "I'm afraid you misunderstand, Sir Mr. Caldwell replied, his smile turning into a polite but lethal barrier. "We require a direct card swipe at this exact moment. We will need to process a payment of exactly $50,000 right now to authorize the upgrade." The lobby fell completely silent. The triumphant grins vanished from my parents' faces, instantly replaced by a stark, suffocating panic. $50,000. Liquid cash. Due immediately. They had absolutely nothing left. Their bank accounts were empty. Their credit lines were exhausted. And I stood in the corner watching the invisible noose tighten perfectly around their necks. The silence in the grand foyer was absolute. $50,000. Liquid cash. Due immediately. Richard stood completely frozen, his tailored tuxedo suddenly looking like a straitjacket. I watched a single bead of sweat form at his temple and slowly roll down his jawline. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His massive shipping empire illusion was crashing into a solid brick wall of reality. Ashley looked at our father, her eyes wide with impatient expectation. "Well, pay the man, Dad," she whined, oblivious to the financial death spiral happening right beside her. "Trey is going to be back from the terrace any minute. I need those keys in my hand." Just as she spoke, the heavy oak doors from the grand terrace swung open. Winston and Beatrice stepped back into the climate-controlled lobby, their tour concluding earlier than expected. They walked toward our chaotic group, projecting that same effortless Southern elite grace. Trey walked a few steps behind them, checking his vintage luxury watch. My mother Barbara saw them approaching. Panic and opportunity collided in her eyes. She knew Richard had absolutely zero access to $50,000. She also knew that if Winston and Beatrice witnessed them failing to secure a simple hotel suite, the entire $5 million investment pitch would be completely annihilated. Barbara made her move. She straightened her spine, plastered on a blindingly fake smile, and stepped proudly in front of my father. "Oh, Richard, darling, do not even bother pulling out your corporate card," Barbara announced, her voice artificially loud and cheerful, ensuring the approaching Atlanta elites could hear every single syllable. "You have handled enough of the wedding expenses this week. Let me take care of this tiny upgrade fee. It is my gift to our beautiful daughter." She reached into her designer handbag with a flourish. Her fingers emerged holding a pristine platinum credit card. I recognized it instantly. It was the card linked directly to the fraudulent loan account. The very same loan they had illegally secured by forging my signature and using my social security number. They genuinely believed that $200,000 of stolen black market money was sitting safely in that account, waiting to fund their delusions of grandeur. Barbara slapped the card onto the polished mahogany concierge desk with an arrogant snap. "Run it for the full $50,000, Mr. Caldwell," she commanded, tilting her chin upward. "And please have the butler bring a bottle of your finest champagne up to the top floor. We have much to celebrate." Winston and Beatrice paused a few feet away, polite smiles on their faces, but their sharp eyes were carefully observing the transaction. In their world, screaming out the cost of a hotel room and aggressively slamming down a credit card was the epitome of new money desperation. But Barbara was too blinded by her own ego to read the room. Mr. Caldwell did not react to her rudeness. He picked up the platinum card with practiced elegance. "Certainly, madam," he said, picking up the sleek wireless payment terminal. "Processing the upgrade fee now." I stood motionless behind the marble pillar, my heart beating a steady, calm rhythm. I watched Mr. Caldwell insert the card into the terminal. He pressed the confirmation button. The machine beeped a soft, high-pitched tone indicating the connection to the banking server. 1 second passed. Richard puffed his chest out, stealing a confident glance at Winston. 2 seconds passed. Ashley crossed her arms, smirking triumphantly at the terrified floral director who was still lingering nearby. 3 seconds passed. Then the terminal let out a harsh, jarring double beep. The screen flashed a brilliant, aggressive red. The color reflected directly onto Barbara's pale face. Mr. Caldwell frowned slightly, inspecting the screen. He pulled the card out and wiped the chip with a microfiber cloth. "My apologies, madam," he murmured, his tone entirely neutral. "There seems to be a slight connection issue. Allow me to try inserting it one more time." Barbara let out a forced, airy laugh, glancing nervously over her shoulder at Trey's parents. "Oh, you know how these elite banking security protocols are," she told Beatrice, waving a manicured hand dismissively. "They flag any large transaction instantly to protect our assets. It is honestly such a hassle having top-tier wealth management." Beatrice offered a tight, thin smile that did not reach her eyes. "Indeed," she replied softly. Mr. Caldwell inserted the card again. He pressed the button. The entire lobby seemed to hold its breath. The terminal screamed its harsh double beep again. The red light illuminated the space between them. "I am so sorry, madam," Mr. Caldwell announced, his voice carrying clearly across the silent foyer. "The transaction has been unequivocally declined. The automated banking system is returning a severe error code. It appears the funds have been completely frozen by the issuing institution." The words dropped like a physical weight onto the marble floor. "Declined," Ashley gasped, taking a step back as if the terminal had physically burned her. "What do you mean, declined?" "Try it again. Swipe the magnetic strip. I assure you, miss the method of entry will not change the result," Mr. Caldwell stated, placing the useless piece of plastic back onto the mahogany desk. "The account is entirely locked. We cannot process the $50,000 upgrade fee. The Ocean View Suite remains your current accommodation." Barbara's face drained of all color. She looked like a ghost standing in her expensive emerald dress. Her hands began to tremble violently. She snatched the card off the desk, staring at it as if it had betrayed her. "That is impossible," Barbara stammered, her voice cracking with raw, unfiltered panic. "There is $200,000 in that specific account. I verified it myself just yesterday. The bank must be making a catastrophic error." Winston's polite smile vanished. He exchanged a very sharp, very serious look with his wife. A family claiming to be international shipping magnates should never face a declined card for a $50,000 hotel bill. A true billionaire would simply pull out another card or make a quick phone call to a private wealth manager. Barbara's sweating, shaking panic was a massive, glaring red flag. Trey stepped forward, his jaw tight with embarrassment. "Is there a problem here, Barbara?" he asked, his tone dripping with newly formed suspicion. "If you need me to cover this minor expense, I can easily arrange it." "No!" Richard shouted far too quickly and far too loudly. My father stepped in front of my mother, physically blocking her from the terminal. His forehead was slick with heavy perspiration. He let out a loud, booming laugh that sounded entirely maniacal. "Absolutely not," Richard barked, slapping Trey on the shoulder with forced camaraderie. "It is just a ridiculous security hold. Our corporate accounts are undergoing a massive international audit today because of the new European merger. My finance team must have accidentally locked the personal cards during the sweep. We will have it sorted out in 5 minutes." Beatrice narrowed her eyes. Her gaze cut right through Richard's pathetic lie. An international audit does not freeze a personal credit line. She knew it. Winston knew it. Trey knew it. The polished elite facade my parents had spent months building was fracturing right in front of them, exposing the desperate, impoverished reality underneath. Ashley, you will stay in the Ocean View suite for now, Barbara commanded, her voice high-pitched and frantic. She grabbed Ashley by the arm, dragging her away from the concierge desk. We have actual wedding business to attend to. We cannot stand around dealing with incompetent banking technology. But I want the top floor. Ashley whined, digging her heels into the marble floor. We will fix it later. Richard snapped his eyes, darting wildly toward Winston and Beatrice. Let us go outside. The air in here is incredibly stuffy. We need to review the seating charts immediately. Richard and Barbara practically sprinted toward the main entrance, pushing Ashley along with them. They did not look back. They did not apologize to Mr. Caldwell. They fled the scene of their humiliation like criminals fleeing a heist gone wrong. Trey followed them, his expression dark and calculating, while Winston and Beatrice walked slowly behind, whispering quietly to each other. Their trust in my family was fundamentally broken. I stepped out from behind the towering marble pillar. I watched the heavy doors swing shut behind them. I picked up my cheap faux leather tote bag, adjusting the strap over my shoulder. My heart beat with a steady, calm rhythm of absolute victory. The first domino had fallen. They were running back to their cars, terrified and confused, completely unaware that the fire burning down their world had been lit by the daughter they threw away. I walked out of the grand mahogany doors of the Monarch estate and breathed in the crisp ocean air. The valet brought around my rental sedan, and I tipped him generously before sliding into the driver's seat. As I steered the car out of the gravel service lot and onto the main highway leading back to Manhattan, my personal cell phone began to vibrate violently against the center console. The caller ID flashed with my mother's name. I let it ring for a solid minute, enjoying the visual representation of her absolute panic. When I finally pressed the answer button, I did not even have the chance to speak. Barbara's voice exploded through the car speakers like a shattered glass window. "You malicious, vindictive little sociopath!" she screamed, her breath hitching with raw, unhinged fury. "You called the credit bureau. You flagged the transaction. You deliberately froze that account just to humiliate us in front of Winston and Beatrice. Do you have any idea what you have just done? You have entirely jeopardized the greatest financial alliance this family has ever seen." I kept my eyes on the road, maintaining a perfectly steady speed. I adjusted the volume on the dashboard, reducing her shrill screaming to a manageable level. "I did not freeze anything, Barbara," I replied, my tone dangerously calm. "I simply set up a standard fraud alert on my own social security number. Did you honestly believe you could forge my signature on a $200,000 black market loan application? And I would just sit back and let you hand my financial future over to a shadow lender? Identity theft is a federal crime. You are incredibly lucky I only froze the pending transfer instead of sending the FBI directly to your hotel room." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. The reality of her felony had finally been spoken out loud, but instead of showing remorse, Barbara doubled down on her extreme delusion. "We did that to protect this family," she shrieked, her voice cracking under the weight of her own lies. "We are trying to secure a $5 million investment from Trey's father. That money would have saved your father's company. We would have paid off your pathetic little loan in a month. You are completely blind to the bigger picture, Gwen. You have always been a small-minded peasant. You just ruined Ashley's life. You ruined our business. You are a disgusting traitor." I reached out and pressed the end call button, cutting off her frantic, toxic rambling. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. They were completely unhinged. They truly believed that stealing my identity was a justifiable business strategy. By the time I reached my Manhattan penthouse, the digital war had already begun. I stepped out of my private elevator and tossed my keys onto the marble console. My tablet, which was synced to my dummy event planning business accounts, was lighting up with hundreds of rapid-fire notifications. I walked over to the kitchen island and tapped the screen. Ashley had unleashed her weapon of choice: social media. She had posted a massive multi-paragraph essay across all her public platforms. The main image was a carefully curated photograph of herself, sitting on the balcony of the Ocean View suite, looking tragically out toward the ocean holding a tissue to her face. She looked like a flawless, heartbroken victim. I began reading the caption. It was a masterpiece of elite manipulation. It breaks my heart to write this just days before I marry the man of my dreams, Ashley wrote. But toxic family members must be exposed. My older sister Gwen has spent the last year entirely consumed by jealousy over my success and my relationship with Trey. She is a bitter, impoverished event planner who has constantly tried to drag our wealthy family down to her level. Today, she committed the ultimate betrayal. She attempted to commit credit card fraud against my parents, blocking our venue payments and trying to extort us for cash. She is a freeloader, a scammer, and a deeply disturbed individual. Please send positive thoughts as Trey and I navigate this horrific sabotage. I am just so grateful to be marrying into a family that actually understands loyalty and class. She had tagged Trey. She had tagged her elite bridal party. She had even tagged the public location of the Monarch estate. Within minutes, her army of superficial trust fund friends mobilized. They formed a digital mob targeting the fake website I had set up years ago to maintain my cover story as a struggling event coordinator. The inbox was flooded with vicious hate mail. "You are a disgusting, jealous loser," one message read. "I hope your pathetic little business goes bankrupt." Another comment on my business page stated, "I heard you steal money from your own parents. You should be locked up. You will never plan another event in this city again." They were leaving fake one-star reviews. They were calling me a fraud. They were trying to completely obliterate a business that did not actually exist. My secure encrypted phone rang. It was David. He sounded incredibly tense. "Gwen, tell me you are looking at this digital circus?" David said, the sound of rapid typing echoing in the background. "Ashley just launched a massive coordinated defamation campaign against your alias. Her friends are actively trying to dox your apartment building. They are attempting to contact your non-existent vendors to ruin your reputation. I have a team of litigators standing by. We can file a massive defamation and cyberbullying lawsuit before the courts close today. We can have her accounts legally suspended and force a public retraction." I walked over to the wet bar and poured myself a glass of sparkling water. I watched the notifications continue to flood the tablet screen. Hundreds of comments pouring in from Atlanta socialites and New York heiresses, all blindly defending Ashley and tearing apart my fake identity. "Do absolutely nothing, David," I instructed, taking a slow sip of the cold water. "Let her post. Let her rally her little friends. Let her type every single defamatory lie she can think of." David paused his typing, stopping abruptly. "Gwen, this is severe character assassination. They are building a public narrative that you are a criminal." I smiled, looking out at the city skyline. "Exactly. They are building a massive permanent digital footprint. Ashley is publicly accusing me of financial crimes while sitting in a hotel room paid for by a fraudulent loan her parents took out in my name. She is tagging her wealthy fiancé, who is currently using his clients' funds to illegally prop up my father's dead company. They are documenting their own arrogance for the entire world to see." I set my glass down on the granite counter. When the truth comes out this weekend, David, every single one of those elite friends commenting on her post, will realize they are defending a family of desperate, broke criminals. I want the contrast to be spectacular. I want them to build the highest pedestal possible so the fall breaks every single bone in their fake reputation. Archive every post, screenshot every comment, build the dossier. We are going to let them celebrate their fake victory on the internet today. Because tomorrow night at the rehearsal dinner, I am going to burn their entire digital kingdom to ashes. The sun had fully set over the Manhattan skyline, casting long shadows across my office. I was still reviewing the dossier David had compiled when a sharp, distinct chime echoed from my encrypted server. It was not another social media notification from Ashley's pathetic digital mob. This was a Level 1 financial security alert. I leaned forward, bringing the banking matrix up on my primary monitor. The alert was originating from my decoy commercial account. This was a modest checking account I maintained at a standard commercial bank linked directly to my fabricated event planning alias. It held barely $50,000, just enough working capital to make my fake business appear legitimate on paper. Red warning banners cascaded down the screen. An external institutional entity was actively attempting to breach the account firewall. Someone was executing a hostile asset freeze. I pressed the intercom button to connect with David, who was still monitoring the situation from his legal war room. David, look at the primary routing node on the decoy account, I said, my voice tight with anticipation. Someone is trying to lock the funds. I heard the clatter of a keyboard on David's end. Give me 5 seconds, he replied, his tone shifting from legal advisor to tactical analyst. I am tracing the institutional IP address. They are not even trying to mask their digital footprint, Gwen. The breach protocol is originating directly from a Tier 1 investment bank. It is Trey's firm. I stared at the screen. Trey, the arrogant senior managing director. He was actually using his corporate credentials to run an illegal backdoor sweep on my personal finances. He must have demanded my routing details from Richard and Barbara after the failed credit card transaction at the estate. He was utilizing his elite banking privileges to initiate a fraudulent institutional hold on my assets. He is bypassing standard legal procedures, I noted, watching the progress bar on the hostile freeze tick upward. He is categorizing my account under a fabricated money laundering investigation to bypass the judicial warrant requirement. It is a massive violation of federal banking regulations, David stated, disbelief coloring his usually stoic voice. He is committing a severe financial crime just to prove a point to your sister. If he executes that freeze, he is looking at a minimum of 10 years in a federal penitentiary for abusing institutional power. Do you want our cybersecurity team to block the access port? Before I could answer, my personal cell phone buzzed on the desk. A text message flashed across the locked screen from an unknown Atlanta area code. You messed with the wrong person. I will make sure you do not have a single cent left. I picked up the phone. I did not text back. I dialed the number directly. Trey answered on the first ring. He did not say hello. He simply let out a low, satisfied chuckle. I see you received my message, Gwen. Trey drawled, his voice dripping with Southern elite arrogance. I warned you at the restaurant not to play games with my family. You thought you could humiliate my future wife and walk away unscathed. You clearly do not understand how real power operates in this world. I kept my breathing perfectly even. And you believe real power involves illegally accessing a private citizen's bank account, Trey, I asked. There is nothing illegal about a licensed bank executive flagging a highly suspicious account for immediate asset freezing, Trey countered smoothly, completely unbothered by my accusation. Given your erratic behavior today, and your apparent involvement in fraudulent credit card activity at the venue, I felt it was my professional duty to initiate a comprehensive hold on your finances. Your little event planning funds are now officially locked. You cannot withdraw a single dollar. You cannot pay your rent. You cannot buy a cup of coffee. He was deeply enjoying this. He was sitting in his luxury suite, practically drunk on his own perceived omnipotence. You are making a monumental mistake, Trey, I said, my voice dropping to a calm, lethal whisper. You are using your firm's institutional portal to execute a personal vendetta. You are manipulating federal banking tools without a shred of legal justification. If you press confirm on that asset freeze, you are crossing a line you can never uncross. Listen to me very carefully, you pathetic nobody, Trey snarled, dropping his polished facade entirely. You are a complete failure. Your own parents despise you. You have absolutely zero leverage and zero protection. I run a department that handles billions of dollars. I can crush your entire existence with one keystroke, and not a single soul will care. You are going to call Ashley right now. You are going to beg for her forgiveness. You are going to grovel at her feet and promise to be her obedient little servant for the rest of this wedding weekend. If you do exactly as you are told, I might consider lifting the hold on your pathetic little checking account next month. I looked at the monitor. The hostile freeze protocol was sitting at 99%. It was waiting for his final executive authorization. I do not beg, I stated simply. Then enjoy bankruptcy, Trey spat. The line went dead. Less than 2 seconds later, the monitor on my desk flashed a brilliant solid red. The decoy account balance of $50,000 was officially locked under a hostile institutional freeze. Trey had actually done it. He had pulled the trigger. He locked it. David confirmed over the intercom, his voice a mix of awe and predatory anticipation. The idiot actually executed an unauthorized federal asset freeze from his corporate terminal. We have the digital fingerprint, the timestamp, and his exact employee identification code logged in our security matrix. He wanted to show me what real power looks like, I said, a cold, genuine smile spreading across my face. He wanted to leave me with absolutely nothing. What is your directive? Gwen David asked. Do not touch the frozen account I ordered. Leave the lock exactly as he placed it. He thinks he just won the war. He thinks he has completely incapacitated me. Let him walk into the rehearsal dinner tomorrow night believing he is a financial god. I leaned back in my chair, my eyes fixed on the red warning banner on the screen. Trey had just handed me the weapon I needed to absolutely annihilate him. He had crossed the ultimate line out of pure ego and toxic arrogance. He was so desperate to protect Ashley's fragile ego and assert his own dominance that he had recklessly endangered his entire career and his family's pristine reputation. He thought he was hunting a helpless rabbit, but he had just willingly locked himself inside the cage with a lion. I kept my eyes locked on the blinking red banner across my primary monitor. Trey genuinely believed he had just crippled a struggling event planner. He was completely unaware that my modest checking account was not a standard retail bank setup. It was a digital honeypot. It was a highly sophisticated decoy constructed by the cybersecurity division of Horizon Holdings, specifically designed to trap aggressive financial predators. The moment Trey bypassed the retail banking protocols and used his senior managing director credentials to freeze my funds, he tripped a massive invisible wire. He had just opened a direct two-way bridge between his highly restricted investment banking terminal and my corporate mainframe. The intercom on my desk crackled to life again. David's voice was no longer just urgent. It was practically vibrating with pure adrenaline. Gwen, you are going to want to look at the secondary monitor right now. Our security algorithm did exactly what it was programmed to do. When Trey initiated the hostile freeze, our firewall did not just block his lateral movement, it executed an aggressive reverse trace. We are currently sitting inside his active terminal session. We can see everything he is doing on his end. I swiveled my heavy leather chair and tapped the screen of my secondary monitor. Lines of encrypted code translated themselves into clear, readable financial ledgers. We were looking directly at Trey's confidential client portfolios. He was managing billions in venture capital and private equity for some of the wealthiest families in the South, but the numbers were drastically out of alignment. I watched intently as David highlighted a series of massive erratic transfers that were actively draining the accounts. Look closely at these routing numbers, David instructed, his rapid keystrokes echoing loudly over the speaker. Trey is bleeding his own clients dry. He is running a massive embezzlement scheme right under his firm's nose. He has been siphoning millions of dollars from high-net-worth accounts and funneling the cash through a complex maze of offshore entities to hide the trail. He is not a wealthy, elite banker, Gwen. He is a desperate criminal, stealing from the very people who trust him with their life savings. My breath caught in my throat as I studied the staggering amounts of stolen capital flashing across my screen. Trey projected the flawless image of untouchable old money, but he was nothing more than a glorified thief trying to keep his own house of cards from collapsing. He was entirely broke, attempting to maintain a lavish lifestyle using stolen funds. But the revelation did not stop there. David let out a sharp, sharp intake of breath over the intercom. Gwen, I am tracking the final destination of these laundered funds. You are not going to believe where Trey is hiding the stolen millions. He just initiated a massive wire transfer scheduled to clear the morning after the wedding ceremony. I leaned closer to the high-resolution screen. The recipient routing code looked incredibly familiar. It was an overseas shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. I quickly cross-referenced the registration number with the background file David had sent me earlier that morning regarding my parents' failing business. My heart pounded with a sudden electric realization that sent a shockwave through my entire body. David, I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, lethal whisper. That shell company belongs to Richard. That is my father's fake import corporation. Exactly, David confirmed, his voice filled with absolute disbelief. Trey is using your father's bankrupt shipping empire as a massive washing machine for his stolen client funds. He is pumping dirty money into Richard's dead company to make it look like legitimate international shipping revenue. Then Richard is supposed to clean the money through his corporate accounts and kick it back to Trey's hidden offshore trusts. The sheer brilliance and absolute depravity of the situation hit me like a freight train. Both families were running a massive con on each other. My parents, Richard and Barbara, genuinely thought they were tricking a wealthy Atlanta dynasty into saving their bankrupt business by marrying off Ashley. They truly believed Trey's family was going to blindly inject $5 million of clean investment capital into their failing enterprise just to secure the marital alliance. They thought they had successfully trapped a billionaire. But Trey and his prestigious parents were playing the exact same game from the opposite side of the board. They knew Richard was desperate for cash. They were actively using my father's failing shipping company as the perfect blind spot to launder their embezzled millions without alerting federal regulators. Trey was not marrying Ashley out of love or social prestige. He was marrying into a desperate, vulnerable family that he could easily control and manipulate to hide his massive federal crimes. It was a match made in absolute hell. Two families of narcissistic fraudsters completely convinced they were outsmarting the other. They were both drowning in debt and criminal liability, smiling at each other across dinner tables while holding daggers behind their backs. And they had both made the fatal mistake of trying to use me as their collateral damage. David, document every single transaction, I commanded, feeling a cold, ruthless smile take over my face. Download the routing numbers, the timestamps, and the exact client portfolios Trey is stealing from. Trace every penny flowing from his bank into Richard's Shell Corporation. Package it all into a single encrypted dossier and print 2 physical copies. What is your directive, Gwen? David asked, his tone reflecting pure professional anticipation. He knew exactly what kind of destruction I was about to authorize. Tomorrow night is the rehearsal dinner, I replied, turning off the glowing monitors on my desk. They want to put on a grand show of elite wealth and unwavering family loyalty. They want to treat me like a piece of garbage in front of their high society guests. I am going to walk into that ballroom and hand them the absolute total annihilation of their entire existence. Prepare the documents, David. We are going to war. The sun dipped below the Atlantic Ocean, casting a brilliant golden glow through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the grand ballroom at the Monarch Estate. It was Friday evening, and the highly anticipated rehearsal dinner was officially underway. The room was a spectacular display of manufactured wealth. Hundreds of imported white orchids cascaded from the vaulted ceilings, and a live string quartet played softly in the corner. Waiters in crisp white jackets circulated with silver trays of champagne and rare caviar. Winston and Beatrice stood near the center of the room, surrounded by their elite Atlanta relatives. They were evaluating every detail with their standard critical eyes. Richard and Barbara were working the room aggressively, pouring expensive wine and laughing a little too loudly at every joke. They were desperately trying to play the part of international shipping magnates. Ashley stood on a slightly elevated dais near the main dining table, wearing a blindingly bright sequined gown that screamed of new money desperation. She was soaking up the attention, twirling her diamond engagement ring and pretending to be the undisputed princess of the evening. Trey stood beside her, holding a glass of scotch, looking incredibly smug. He firmly believed he had completely destroyed my life yesterday afternoon. I did not enter through the service doors this time. I walked straight up the grand front steps of my own property. I had discarded the cheap navy blazer and the scuffed flats. Tonight I wore a custom-tailored midnight blue silk gown that draped flawlessly across my silhouette. It was a masterpiece of quiet luxury designed exclusively for me in Milan. I paired it with a simple but breathtaking vintage sapphire necklace that commanded attention without begging for it. I wore my hair swept up into an elegant, structured style, and my makeup was sharp, immaculate, and lethal. I did not look like a struggling event coordinator. I looked exactly like the billionaire chief executive officer of Horizon Holdings. I signaled the attendant to open the heavy mahogany double doors to the ballroom. As the doors swung wide open, I stepped over the threshold and into the warm glow of the chandeliers. The reaction was instantaneous and intoxicating. The loud chatter near the entrance abruptly died down. Guests stopped mid-sentence, turning their heads to look at me. In the world of high society, true power has a specific magnetic gravity, and every person in that room felt it the second I walked in. I moved across the polished marble floor with absolute unyielding confidence. The crowd naturally parted for me, forming a clear path through the sea of designer suits and evening gowns. From her elevated position, Ashley spotted me. The glass of champagne in her hand tilted dangerously, spilling a few drops onto her sequined dress. Her jaw practically unhinged. She expected to see a broken, weeping woman crawling in through the back door to beg for forgiveness. Instead, she saw a woman who completely eclipsed her in every conceivable way. My presence instantly reduced her to looking like a cheap plastic doll wrapped in glitter. The attention of Trey's entire elite family shifted away from the bride and locked directly onto me. Trey gripped his scotch glass so tightly his knuckles turned white. His arrogant smirk dissolved into a mask of pure, unadulterated confusion. He had personally locked my decoy bank account. He thought I was penniless, starving, and terrified. Yet here I was, radiating an aura of untouchable wealth that rivaled his own parents. Barbara saw me and nearly collapsed. She grabbed Richard's arm, her manicured nails digging into his tuxedo sleeve. She pointed frantically in my direction, her face twisting into a hideous mask of panic and rage. She knew immediately that I was not here to hand over a cashier's check. She knew I was here to detonate the bomb. Barbara let go of Richard and aggressively grabbed the arm of Giselle, who was busy adjusting a floral arrangement nearby. I watched Barbara whisper furiously into Giselle's ear, pointing directly at me. Giselle's face lit up with vicious, righteous indignation. This was her moment to prove her loyalty to the wealthy clients. She snapped her fingers and signaled for two large venue security guards stationed near the terrace doors to follow her. Giselle marched across the ballroom floor, her stilettos clicking sharply against the marble. She intercepted me right in the center of the room, ensuring we had a massive audience. "What in the world do you think you are doing here?" Gwen Giselle hissed, her voice loud enough for the surrounding guests to hear. "This is a highly exclusive private event. You were specifically barred from attending this dinner by the hosts. Did you really think you could rent a fancy dress and sneak in here to steal the spotlight from your sister?" I stopped walking and looked down at the wedding planner. I kept my posture perfectly straight and offered her a cold, serene smile. "I do not need an invitation to walk into this room, Giselle," I said, my voice carrying a quiet, heavy authority that made her blink in surprise. "You are severely delusional," Giselle scoffed, placing her hands on her hips. "Your mother warned me you might try to pull a stunt like this. You are a bitter, broke nobody who is trying to ruin a multi-million-dollar wedding. I told you yesterday I have a very close personal relationship with the owner of this estate. If you do not turn around and walk out those doors right now, I will have you permanently banned from every luxury venue on the East Coast." She turned dramatically to the two security guards who had stopped a few feet behind her. "Gentlemen, grab this woman by the arms and physically escort her off the premises. Throw her out the back service doors. If she resists, call the local police and have her arrested for trespassing." The guests surrounding us gasped collectively. Beatrice and Winston watched the scene unfold with deep, aristocratic disapproval. Ashley looked down from her dais, a triumphant, nasty smile returning to her face as she waited for me to be dragged out like a criminal. I did not flinch. I did not take a single step back. I looked at the two security guards. They were heavily built men wearing the crisp black uniforms of my own private security firm. They looked at Giselle. Then they looked at me. They recognized me immediately. I held my ground, raising a single eyebrow at the guards, waiting to see exactly how they would respond to a rogue wedding planner, giving them orders to assault their ultimate employer. The two security guards remained perfectly still, refusing to lay a single finger on my silk gown. They stared at Giselle with blank professional expressions, entirely ignoring her frantic screeching. Giselle stamped her stiletto heel against the marble floor, her face turning a vibrant shade of crimson. She opened her mouth to scream at them again, but the booming sound of microphone feedback suddenly pierced the heavy silence of the ballroom. Everyone turned their attention toward the elevated dais near the string quartet. Richard had abandoned his desperate networking with the Atlanta elite and marched directly onto the small stage. He snatched the microphone from its silver stand, his knuckles white with tension. He was sweating profusely, but he forced his features into a mask of profound, patriarchal sorrow. He knew he was losing control of the room, and he needed a spectacular performance to salvage his fraudulent $5 million investment pitch. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard announced, his voice echoing through the massive speakers and bouncing off the crystal chandeliers. "I must deeply and profoundly apologize for this unfortunate interruption. We invited you all here tonight to celebrate the beautiful union of Ashley and Trey. We wanted this evening to be a flawless testament to love and high society. But sadly, every prominent family has a dark, heavy cross they are forced to bear." He paused dramatically, lowering his head and letting out a heavy, rehearsed sigh. Barbara stood near the front row of tables, clutching her emerald wrap and nodding with fake tears shimmering in her eyes. Winston and Beatrice watched my father with intense scrutiny, their champagne flutes suspended in midair. "The woman standing before you in the center of the ballroom is my eldest daughter, Gwen." Richard continued, pointing a condemning finger directly at me. "I have spent my entire life trying to provide her with the finest education and the greatest opportunities. But some people are simply born with a bitter, toxic soul. She dropped out of her studies, she rejected our guidance, and she chose to live a life of complete failure. Now she works as a low-level event planner, struggling to make ends meet in a tiny apartment." The whispers rippled through the sea of designer suits and expensive gowns. The elite guests from Atlanta murmured to one another, casting judgmental glances at my tailored midnight blue dress, clearly wondering how a failure could afford such breathtaking couture. But Richard was completely blind to the reality of my appearance. He was too consumed by his own desperate narrative. Instead of finding her own path, Gwen has allowed petty jealousy to completely rot her mind, Richard proclaimed, his voice rising in theatrical agony. She could not stand to see her younger sister marry into a family of such incredible prestige and wealth. Over the past 24 hours, she has actively attempted to sabotage this beautiful wedding. She tried to commit credit card fraud against us. She tried to cancel our venue contracts. She is nothing but a jealous extortionist who came here tonight to blackmail us for cash. She is completely and entirely unwelcome in this family and at this celebration." Ashley let out a loud, dramatic sob from her seat, covering her face with her hands. Barbara rushed over to comfort her, playing the role of the devoted, protective mother. The performance was sickeningly perfect. They were painting me as a deranged, impoverished criminal who had crashed a billionaire event out of pure spite. That was the exact moment Trey decided to assert his dominance. He handed his scotch glass to a passing waiter and walked down the steps of the dais with a slow, arrogant swagger. He adjusted his charcoal suit jacket, projecting the image of a fearless protector stepping up to shield his fragile bride from a monster. He walked straight toward me, his expensive leather shoes echoing sharply in the silent ballroom. The crowd parted for him, watching with bated breath as the powerful investment banker confronted the supposedly desperate extortionist. Trey stopped a mere 2 feet in front of me. He looked me up and down with absolute, unfiltered disgust. He was radiating a toxic, victorious energy. He knew he had locked my decoy bank account yesterday. He truly believed I was standing before him completely bankrupt, stripped of every single dollar I owned, and desperate for a handout. I warned you not to play games with us, Gwen Trey said, his voice loud enough for the front row of guests to hear every condescending syllable. I told you that my family operates on a level of wealth and power that you could never possibly comprehend. You thought you could walk into a room full of actual titans and demand attention. You thought putting on a fake designer dress would somehow hide the fact that you are a miserable broke nobody. I kept my chin held high, maintaining unbroken eye contact. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to defend myself. I simply let him dig the trench deeper. You are a stain on this beautiful evening. Trey continued, his tone dripping with lethal arrogance. You are embarrassing yourself, and you are embarrassing the high society standards of my family. We do not negotiate with desperate scammers. We do not entertain jealousy from the bottom tier of society. Trey reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket. He pulled out a sleek designer money clip. With a swift, practiced motion, he extracted a single crisp $100 bill. He held it up between his index and middle fingers, displaying it to the crowd like a king tossing a breadcrumb to a starving peasant. He looked me dead in the eyes, a cruel, satisfied smirk twisting his features. He let go of the bill. The green paper fluttered through the air and landed softly on the polished marble floor, right at the tip of my high heels. Take this pocket change, call a cab, and crawl back to your hole, Trey commanded, his voice echoing with absolute finality. The ballroom was paralyzed. No one breathed. Winston and Beatrice nodded slightly, clearly approving of their son's ruthless handling of a perceived threat. Richard and Barbara beamed with pride, thrilled that their future son-in-law had publicly executed their dirty work. Ashley stopped her fake crying and smirked down at me, waiting for me to shatter into a million pieces and run crying into the night. I looked down at the $100 bill resting on the pristine floor of my own multi-million-dollar property. Then I slowly lifted my gaze and looked right back at Trey. A cold, genuine smile crept onto my face. The sheer beauty of his arrogance was almost poetic. They had played their final hand. They had exhausted every lie, every insult, and every manipulation they possessed. They had pushed all their chips to the absolute center of the table. They had no idea that I held the winning hand, and I was about to burn their entire casino to the ground. The crisp $100 bill lay on the polished marble floor, a vibrant green insult meant to break my spirit. Trey smirked, adjusting his expensive cuffs, fully expecting me to drop to my knees and scramble for the loose cash. Ashley stood on the dais, crossing her arms with a vicious look of triumph, while Richard and Barbara radiated smug satisfaction. Giselle, emboldened by the displays of elite cruelty, shrieked at the security guards who were still standing perfectly still near the terrace doors. "Grab her right now!" she commanded, her voice cracking with pure hysteria. "Throw this trash out the service doors before she ruins the aesthetic of the entire evening." But the heavily built men in the black uniforms did not move toward me with aggression. Instead, the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom swung open with a resounding thud. A synchronized unit of 8 elite security personnel marched into the room in perfect formation. The wealthy guests gasped, stepping back in alarm to clear a wide path. The guards did not grab my arms. They did not shout or draw weapons. They marched directly to where I stood, executed a sharp synchronized turn, and formed 2 perfect protective lines flanking my sides. They bowed their heads slightly in a universal gesture of absolute respect and subservience. The entire ballroom froze. The air was instantly sucked out of the room. Trey took a hesitant step backward, his arrogant smirk faltering as he looked at the wall of muscle protecting me. Through the secure corridor created by the guards walked Jonathan, the National Chief Operating Officer of Horizon Holdings. He was a man who managed billions in global commercial assets, known across Wall Street for his ruthless corporate efficiency. He wore a razor-sharp tailored suit, his silver hair catching the light of the crystal chandeliers. He did not spare a single glance for Richard, for Barbara, or for the supposedly elite Atlanta banking family. He walked directly up to me, stopped, and offered a deep formal bow of total reverence. "Good evening, Madam CEO," Jonathan said, his voice carrying clearly in the dead silent room. "The encrypted financial dossiers you requested have been fully compiled and completely verified by our legal and cybersecurity divisions. The trap is perfectly locked." He handed me a thick black leather portfolio bearing the gold-embossed crest of Horizon Holdings. I took the portfolio, the weight of their imminent destruction, resting comfortably in my hands. The collective gasp from the room was palpable. The whispered title of CEO rippled through the crowd of wealthy socialites like an electric shock. I stepped forward, leaving Trey's pathetic $100 bill on the floor. I walked straight past the paralyzed investment banker and ascended the carpeted steps of the dais. Richard stood frozen, clutching the microphone, his face drained of all color, resembling a terrified wax figure rather than a powerful shipping magnate. I reached out and firmly pulled the microphone from his sweating, trembling fingers. He offered zero resistance. His eyes were wide with a dawning, horrific realization. I turned to face the sea of designer gowns and bespoke tuxedos. The string quartet had long since stopped playing their bows, resting silently on their cellos. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," I announced, my voice steady, resonant, and dripping with undeniable authority. "Please allow me to properly introduce myself, since my father's earlier speech was heavily fictionalized. I am Gwen. I am the sole founder, chairman, and chief executive officer of Horizon Holdings. We are a multinational real estate and hospitality conglomerate. And more specifically relevant to tonight's gathering, I am the sole 100% owner of the Monarch Estate." The sound of a champagne flute shattering against the marble floor violently broke the silence. It was Giselle. The luxury wedding planner's knees visibly buckled beneath her. She staggered backward, hitting a cocktail table, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. She had spent the entire morning and the previous day screaming at me, forcing me to carry heavy garment bags like a pack mule and insulting my clothes. She had bragged loudly about having drinks with the fictional older gentleman who owned the estate. Now she was staring directly at the 33-year-old female billionaire she had been treating like a peasant. Giselle let out a pathetic, suffocated wheeze and literally collapsed onto the floor, clutching her gold-plated clipboard to her chest, as if it could save her from professional execution. I looked directly down at her trembling form from the stage. "Giselle." I spoke into the microphone, my voice echoing like a judge delivering a fatal sentence. "You have consistently demonstrated an appalling lack of basic professionalism, an atrocious attitude toward my staff, and a fundamental misunderstanding of luxury hospitality. You are officially stripped of all vendor privileges at any property owned by Horizon Holdings worldwide. Furthermore, your entire agency is fired effective immediately. You have exactly 10 minutes to pack your equipment and vacate my property before my security team physically throws you out the service doors you are so incredibly fond of." Giselle scrambled to her feet, her stilettos slipping wildly on the polished floor. She was sobbing hysterically as she ran toward the exit, abandoning Ashley entirely. The guests watched the wedding planner flee in absolute shock. I turned my gaze back to the crowd, settling my eyes on my parents and my sister. Ashley was hyperventilating, gripping the edges of the dais, staring at me as if I had just descended from the heavens to strike her down. Richard and Barbara looked like they were facing a firing squad, holding on to each other for physical support. As for this rehearsal dinner and the main event scheduled for tomorrow afternoon, I continued holding up the black leather portfolio. "I am officially exercising my executive rights as the property owner to terminate the venue rental contract, effective immediately. This entire wedding is canceled. You are all actively trespassing on private property." The shockwave that hit the room was catastrophic. Beatrice and Winston, the untouchable Atlanta elites, stood with their mouths slightly open, the sheer scandal of a canceled high society wedding washing over them. They looked at Richard and Barbara, expecting intense outrage or an immediate legal defense. But my parents could not speak. They knew they had no legal standing. They knew they were broke, fraudulent, and completely at my mercy. I had just dismantled their $500,000 illusion with a single command, kicking them out of the most exclusive venue on the coast the night before the wedding. But the destruction was only just beginning. I placed my hand on the cover of the black leather portfolio, ready to show the elite guests exactly who they were truly celebrating. I opened the black leather portfolio. The satisfying weight of the glossy pages felt like the physical manifestation of absolute karma. The silence in the ballroom was total, a collective holding of breath from hundreds of elite guests. I looked at Jonathan, who stood impeccably straight at the edge of the dais. I gave him a single sharp nod. Instantly, the massive digital projection screens flanking the ballroom flickered to life. These screens had been originally set up to display a nauseatingly perfect slideshow of Ashley and Trey playing the roles of a flawless power couple. Instead, the romantic lighting dimmed, replaced by the harsh, glaring white light of high-resolution scanned documents. Gasps echoed through the room as a highly confidential loan application materialized on the screens. The text was massive, undeniable, and damning. I raised the microphone back to my lips. What you are looking at, ladies and gentlemen, is the true financial foundation of this magnificent evening, I announced. My voice was steady, slicing through the heavy air of the room. This is a black market loan application for $200,000. You will notice the applicant name is mine. You will notice the social security number belongs to me. However, I did not sign this document. Richard lunged forward, his hands grasping empty air, as if he could physically tear the digital projection down from the wall. "Turn that off!" he bellowed, his voice cracking with sheer, uncontrollable panic. "This is a private family matter. You are violating corporate confidentiality." "There is nothing corporate about identity theft," Richard Fye replied, dropping the title of father permanently and entirely. "You and Barbara forged my signature. You attempted to shackle me to a predatory shadow lender just to secure the cash needed to pay for this venue. You were willing to completely destroy my financial future to maintain your fragile, pathetic illusion of wealth." Barbara rushed toward the dais, her emerald silk dress catching on the edge of a banquet chair. "We did it for the family," she shrieked, tears of genuine terror streaming down her face. "We were going to pay it back. We just needed a bridge loan." "Winston, Beatrice, please do not listen to her. She has always been severely mentally unstable. She fabricated these documents to ruin us." I slowly turned my gaze away from my crumbling parents and locked eyes directly with Trey's parents. Winston stood rigid, his jaw set in stone. Beatrice looked as though she had just swallowed pure poison. Her posture remained perfectly straight, but her eyes burned with a terrifying, quiet fury. They were members of an elite society that valued transparency and honor above all else, and they were currently watching a public meltdown of epic proportions. Winston, Beatrice, why spoke their names with measured respect, contrasting sharply with my mother's hysterical screeching. "You traveled all the way from Atlanta under the impression that you were merging your esteemed generational legacy with a powerful international shipping dynasty. You were promised a union of equals. You were promised a highly lucrative expansion project that required a $5 million investment from your venture capital firm." I raised my hand, and Jonathan pressed a button on his remote. The projection screens shifted instantly. A certified federal court filing appeared in bold red letters. "You think you are marrying into immense wealth," I challenged, pointing directly at the massive screen. "Take a very close look at that document. That is the official insolvency record for Richard's shipping empire. They do not have millions tied up in European logistics. Their company has been entirely bankrupt for 8 full months." The murmurs in the ballroom escalated into an immediate uproar. Wealthy socialites whispered frantically behind their hands, their eyes darting between the screen and my parents. The elite guests from Atlanta stared at Richard and Barbara as if they were covered in a contagious disease. "They are drowning in lawsuits from unpaid overseas suppliers," I declared, my voice commanding the chaotic room. "Their corporate accounts are completely drained, and their personal credit lines are maxed out to the absolute limit. They do not have the money to pay for the catering you are currently eating. They do not have the money to pay for the floral arrangements hanging above your heads. This entire wedding is nothing but a desperate, elaborate scam. I continued driving the final nail into their coffin. This $500,000 party is a theatrical production designed exclusively to blind you. They created this illusion of grandeur to lure you into a false sense of security, all so they could siphon $5 million from your family to bail out their dead company. They used my stolen money to rent the stage, and they used Ashley as the bait. The impact of the truth was physically devastating. Richard staggered backward, clutching his chest. His legs gave out entirely, and he collapsed heavily into a gilded banquet chair, putting his head between his trembling hands. The invincible patriarch, the man who had thrown me onto the street for refusing to follow his elite path, was completely shattered in front of his peers. Barbara fell to her knees on the cold marble floor. Her expensive emerald dress pooled around her as she sobbed uncontrollably. She reached her shaking hands out toward Beatrice, begging for an ounce of mercy. Beatrice simply took one deliberate, disgusted step backward, completely withdrawing her physical presence from the proximity of a scammer. The rejection was absolute and lethal. Ashley stood frozen on the stage beside me, her mouth hanging open. She stared up at the bankruptcy documents as if the world had just ended. The horrifying reality washed over her face. She had absolutely no idea. She genuinely believed she was a wealthy heiress. Her parents had lied to her too, keeping her completely in the dark so she could play the role of the arrogant, wealthy bride with total conviction. "You are a liar!" Ashley screamed, her voice raw and breaking. "Dad, tell them she is lying. Tell them we are rich. Tell them." Richard did not look up. He kept his face buried in his hands, letting out a long, defeated groan. His silence confirmed every single word I had spoken. The elite facade was entirely eradicated. The room buzzed with the sound of a dynasty burning to the ground. But as the crowd reeled from the exposure of my parents, I turned my attention to the man standing just a few feet away. Trey stood tall, his chest puffed out, an expression of righteous indignation plastered on his face. He believed he was the ultimate victim in this scenario, completely unaware that his own execution was scheduled next. Trey thrust his chest out, refusing to accept his impending downfall. He actually had the audacity to try and play the victim right in front of the crowd. He pointed a trembling, manicured finger at Richard and Barbara, who were still sobbing helplessly on the floor. "You absolute frauds!" Trey shouted, his voice cracking with manufactured outrage. "You deliberately tried to con my family. You lied to us about your wealth. Gwen, you might own this building, but you are completely out of line disrupting my life like this. I demand you have your security escort these criminals off the property immediately. I will not have my pristine reputation associated with this garbage." I let out a sharp, genuinely amused laugh. "Your pristine reputation?" I repeated the words, echoing through the grand ballroom. I gripped the heavy black leather portfolio in my hands. Without another word, I threw the thick binder directly at his chest. It hit him with a solid, heavy thud, forcing him to stumble backward and drop his glass of scotch, which shattered violently across the marble. "Open it, Trey. Read your own death sentence." I signaled Jonathan. He pressed the remote and the massive digital screens flickered again. The bankruptcy documents vanished instantly, replaced by columns of highly classified banking ledgers. Brilliant red lines highlighted massive offshore wire transfers alongside confidential account names. "You made a fatal mistake yesterday afternoon, Trey," I announced, pacing slowly across the dais. "When you arrogantly used your corporate credentials to illegally freeze my personal checking account, you triggered a military-grade cybersecurity firewall. My security division executed a reverse trace straight into your active terminal. We watched you work. We downloaded everything." The crowd gasped in unison as the stolen numbers on the screens climbed into the tens of millions. "You are not a financial genius," I declared, my voice turning lethal. "You are an embezzler. You have been systematically bleeding your own elite clients dry. You siphoned their life savings and funneled the cash into offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. But you needed a blind spot to wash the dirty money clean. You needed a desperate failing business to act as your personal laundry machine. I pointed directly at my weeping father. You found Richard. You two formed the perfect parasitic relationship. He needed your stolen cash to pretend he was still a billionaire, and you needed his dead shipping company to hide your federal crimes from the Securities and Exchange Commission. You were not marrying Ashley out of love or status. You were marrying into a desperate family so you could launder your money through their corporate accounts without alerting federal regulators. Trey went completely pale. The arrogant southern charm melted off his face, leaving behind a terrified, cornered animal. He opened his mouth to deny it, to scream that the documents were forged, but the evidence was absolutely irrefutable. His own corporate signature codes were stamped on every single illegal transaction displayed on the massive screens. Beatrice stepped forward. The matriarch of the Atlanta banking dynasty looked at her son with a disgust so profound it could have frozen the ocean. She raised her hand and struck Trey across the face. The slap echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. Trey's head snapped to the side, a bright red handprint blooming instantly on his cheek. "You have disgraced our lineage," Beatrice stated, her voice completely devoid of any maternal affection. "You have weaponized the trust of our oldest friends to line your own pockets. You are a thief." Winston adjusted his custom linen suit, his eyes burning with lethal disappointment. "This wedding is entirely canceled," he announced to the terrified room. "My family will fully cooperate with all federal investigations. Trey, you are no longer a member of our firm and you are no longer my son." Right on cue, the heavy brass doors of the ballroom swung open. David walked in, flanked by 6 agents wearing tactical jackets bearing the bold letters of federal law enforcement. David had coordinated the entire raid, perfectly timing their arrival for maximum psychological impact. The lead agent stepped forward, flashing a gold shield. Richard Barbara and Trey, the agent, announced, his commanding voice cutting through the remaining whispers. "You are all under arrest for wire fraud, massive identity theft, and federal embezzlement." Handcuffs clicked sharply into place. The sound was melodic. My father offered zero resistance, his spirit completely broken. My mother wailed hysterically, dragging her knees across the marble floor as agents pulled her up by her arms. Trey stared blankly ahead, his entire elite existence reduced to a pair of cold steel cuffs around his wrists. They were marched out of the ballroom, humiliated and paraded in front of the very high society guests they had tried to impress. Ashley was left entirely alone. The golden child was standing in her tacky sequined gown, surrounded by the absolute ruins of her fake dynasty. She looked around the empty space where her wealthy groom and her arrogant parents had stood just moments ago. She dropped to her knees right at the edge of the dais. Real, genuine tears finally poured down her heavily contoured face. She crawled forward, grabbing the hem of my midnight blue silk gown. "Gwen, please," Ashley sobbed, her voice cracking with absolute terror. "They are taking my parents. I have no money. I have no home. The wedding vendors are going to sue me for millions. You have to save me. I am your sister. I will do anything you want. I will be your assistant. Please do not leave me here." I looked down at her tear-stained face. There was no pity left in my heart. They had burned that bridge to ash 15 years ago. I reached down and picked up the crisp $100 bill Trey had thrown at my feet just minutes prior. I folded it neatly and pressed it firmly into Ashley's trembling palm. I leaned down so only she could hear me. "Catch an Uber home," I said, echoing the exact cruel command Trey had used against me. "This place is not for scammers." I pulled my silk gown from her desperate grasp. I turned my back on her sobbing form and walked straight down the center aisle of the grand ballroom. The security guards parted, forming a pristine pathway to the exit. I stepped out of the heavy mahogany doors and into the cool evening air. My private chauffeur stood waiting by the open door of a gleaming armored ultra-luxury sedan. I stepped inside, letting the heavy door close with a solid, definitive thud. I poured myself a glass of vintage champagne as the car glided down the private driveway, severing my ties with their toxic existence forever. The greatest lesson we can take away from this story is that true power and authentic wealth can never be faked or stolen. So many people spend their entire lives chasing the illusion of status. They wear designer clothes they cannot afford and build fragile empires on top of lies simply to impress people who do not genuinely care about them. When you build your life on deception and ego, your foundation is bound to crumble. We saw how a family prioritized a fake image over their own flesh and blood, willing to commit unforgivable betrayals just to maintain a facade. They confused cruelty with strength and arrogance with power. But real success operates in silence. It does not need to scream for attention or tear others down to elevate itself. Another profound takeaway is the absolute necessity of recognizing your own worth and setting unbreakable boundaries. Blood relations do not automatically entitle anyone to a place in your life, especially if they only bring toxicity and abuse. Walking away from the people who constantly belittle you is not an act of cruelty, it is the ultimate act of self-preservation. You have to be willing to protect your peace and the empire you build, whether that is a business, a career, or simply your own mental health. When you stop seeking validation from those who are determined to misunderstand you, you free yourself to reach heights they could never even imagine. Justice often comes naturally when you simply step back and let toxic people destroy themselves with their own choices. If you have ever had to cut ties with toxic people to protect your own peace, let me know your story in the comments below, and do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more empowering stories of resilience and karma.